The radio crackled at 3:15 Tuesday afternoon, Teresa's voice tight with urgency. "Troy, you copy? We've got missing hikers." I froze on the muddy trail, snow melt soaking my boots. The cold seeped through the worn leather, but it was nothing compared to the chill that ran down my spine at those words. Guided group. 3 days overdue. 3 days meant hope was already slipping away. In these mountains, 3 days could mean the difference between a rescue and a recovery. I had seen it too many times in my 19 years patrolling Mount Rainier National Park. Last location, Wonderland Trail near Mowich Lake. My stomach dropped. Mowich Lake. Of all the places in this park, it had to be there. I pressed the radio button, my thumb trembling slightly. "Copy that, Teresa." "How many in the group?" 7 total, 6 hikers plus their guide. The guide is Chester Millwood. I knew Chester. Everyone in the ranger station knew Chester. He had been leading groups through these trails for over 30 years. If Chester was missing, something had gone terribly wrong. Chester knew every rock, every stream, every hidden danger in these woods. He knew when to turn back. He knew when to seek shelter. He knew the mountain's moods better than anyone alive. Then she added, "We intercepted an emergency transmission last night." I waited, the forest around me suddenly too quiet. Even the birds had stopped their afternoon songs. It was broken up, mostly static, but we caught a few words. Teresa paused, and I could hear her swallow hard even through the radio static. She said, "They kept repeating something about the trees watching them." And then someone screamed, and the transmission cut out. I stood there in the middle of the trail, surrounded by towering Douglas firs that suddenly seemed closer than before. The afternoon light was fading faster than it should, the shadows between the trees growing longer, darker, hungrier. I had worked in these forests long enough to know that fear was a luxury a ranger could not afford. But standing there, with Teresa's words echoing in my mind, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt afraid. I made it back to the ranger station within the hour, my legs burning from the pace I had set. The station was a modest wooden building nestled at the edge of the wilderness, a thin line between civilization and the vast unknown that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. When I pushed through the door, I found Teresa hunched over the radio equipment, her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She looked up when I entered, and I could see the worry etched deep in the lines of her face. Teresa had been working dispatch for 23 years. She had heard things over that radio that would keep most people awake for the rest of their lives, but I had never seen her look like this. She looked haunted. "Troy, thank God." I pulled up a chair beside her and sat down heavily, my wet boots leaving muddy prints on the floor. "Tell me everything." She took a deep breath and consulted her notes, written in her neat, precise handwriting on a yellow legal pad. The group registered at the Mowich Lake trailhead last Friday morning. 7 people total, Chester Millwood as the guide. The hikers were Harold and Edna Patterson, a retired couple from Portland. Walter Fleming, a school teacher from Tacoma. Dorothy Shaw, a nature photographer, and 2 brothers, Earl and Clarence Whitmore, both in their early 30s. They were supposed to complete a 4-day loop and return Monday evening. When they did not check in, we started trying to reach them by radio. Nothing. We sent a preliminary search team yesterday morning, but they came back before nightfall. They said they could not find any trace of the group past the first campsite. I frowned. That does not make sense. Chester always follows the established route. He is religious about it. Teresa nodded slowly. That is what I thought too, but it gets stranger. She reached over and pressed a button on the radio equipment. "I want you to hear this yourself." The speakers crackled to life, and at first all I could hear was static, that familiar white noise that filled the gaps between transmissions. But then, underneath the static, I heard something else. A voice. It was faint, distorted, barely recognizable as human. But it was definitely a voice. I leaned closer, straining to make out the words. "This is Millwood. Emergency. Something is wrong. The trees. They are watching. We tried to leave, but the trail, it keeps." I heard another voice in the background, higher pitched, panicked, and then the scream. It was not a scream of surprise or even pain. It was a scream of pure, primal terror, the kind of sound a human being makes when they are confronted with something their mind cannot process. The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving only static. Teresa turned off the recording and we sat in silence for a long moment. "When did this come in?" I asked finally. "Last night, around 2 a.m. I tried to respond, tried to establish contact, but there was nothing, just dead air. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to process what I had just heard. Chester Millwood was one of the most level-headed men I had ever known. In 30 years of guiding, he had faced bears, mountain lions, flash floods, and hypothermic conditions. I had never heard fear in his voice, until now. "We need to mount a full search and rescue operation," I said. "First light tomorrow. I want every available ranger, and we need to contact County Search and Rescue for additional support." Teresa was already nodding, reaching for the phone. "I will make the calls. But Troy, there is something else you should know." I waited. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the receiver. Before the transmission from Chester, we picked up something else. Another signal, very faint, on a frequency we do not normally monitor. What kind of signal? I do not know how to describe it. It was not voices, not exactly. It was more like sounds, rhythmic sounds, almost like breathing, but not quite. And underneath that, something that sounded like whispers, but not in any language I have ever heard. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. How long did it last? About 20 minutes. It started around 1:30 a.m. and faded out just before Chester's transmission came through. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to chalk it up to atmospheric interference, crossed signals from some distant radio station, anything that would make rational sense. But something in Teresa's eyes told me she had already considered all those explanations, and rejected them. "I need you to keep that recording," I said. "Both recordings. Do not let anyone else hear them until I get back." She nodded, understanding without me having to explain. In a situation like this, panic was our greatest enemy. If word got out that something strange was happening on the mountain, we would have media crews and amateur investigators flooding the area, contaminating potential evidence, putting themselves in danger. And if there was something out there, something that had made Chester Millwood scream like that, the last thing we needed was more potential victims. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for the search. I checked my gear 3 times, making sure I had everything I might need for an extended operation. First aid kit, emergency blankets, flares, extra batteries for my flashlight and radio, water purification tablets, energy bars, a detailed topographic map of the Moich Lake area, and my service weapon. I had carried that pistol for 19 years and had only drawn it twice, both times for bear encounters that ended without incident. But something told me this time might be different. As I packed, I found my mind wandering back to the stories I had heard over the years. Every national park has its legends, its unexplained incidents, its cases that were never quite solved. Mount Rainier was no exception. There were the hikers who vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but their abandoned tents. There were the campers who reported seeing lights in the forest at night, moving between the trees with purpose and intelligence. There were the hunters who came back from the deep woods changed, refusing to speak about what they had seen, their eyes carrying a haunted look that never quite faded. And then there were the older stories, the ones that predated the park itself. The Native American tribes who had lived in the shadow of the mountain for thousands of years had their own names for the places we now marked on tourist maps. They had their own warnings about certain valleys, certain groves, certain stretches of trail where the spirits were not friendly to human visitors. Most rangers dismissed these stories as folklore, as quaint legends to be shared around campfires for entertainment. But I had been in these woods long enough to know that not all stories were fiction. Some stories were warnings, and the wise man heeded them. I slept poorly that night, my dreams filled with dark trees and distant screams. When my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., I was already awake, staring at the ceiling of my small cabin, listening to the wind whisper through the pines outside my window. I got dressed in the darkness, my movements automatic after years of early morning patrols. By the time I reached the ranger station, the sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading one by one as dawn approached. The parking lot was already full of vehicles. I counted 3 ranger trucks, 2 county search and rescue vans, and a handful of private cars belonging to volunteer searchers. Teresa had done her job well. Inside, the station was a hive of activity. I found Teresa coordinating with the search teams, assigning sectors, distributing maps and radio frequencies. Standing beside her was a man I recognized immediately, even though I had not seen him in years. His name was Eugene Haskell, and he was the most experienced tracker in the Pacific Northwest. He had retired from the Park Service a decade ago, but he still lived in a small cabin at the edge of the wilderness, and he still answered the call when things got serious. Eugene was in his 70s now, his hair white as snow, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were still sharp, still carried that intense focus that had made him legendary among search and rescue teams. He nodded when he saw me, his expression grave. "Troy, Bad business this, the worst. I walked over and shook his hand. I appreciate you coming, Eugene. We are going to need your skills on this one. He grunted. Heard the recording. Teresa played it for me. I had never seen fear in Chester's voice before. Now it was Eugene's turn to look unsettled. Neither had I. We gathered the search teams in the main room of the station for a briefing. There were 18 of us in total, a mix of rangers, search and rescue volunteers, and a few experienced locals who knew the mountain well. I stood at the front of the room, a large map of the Wonderland Trail pinned to the wall behind me. All right, everyone, listen up. We have 7 missing persons, including one of our most experienced guides. They were last confirmed at the Mowich Lake trailhead 5 days ago. Their planned route would have taken them counterclockwise along the Wonderland Trail, with overnight stops at designated campsites. Yesterday's preliminary search found evidence of their first campsite, but nothing beyond that. I pointed to the map, tracing the route with my finger. We are going to divide into 3 teams. Team 1, led by myself, will take the primary route along the trail, starting from the last known campsite. Team 2, led by Ranger Hawkins, will sweep the northern approach, covering the areas off-trail that an experienced guide might use as alternates. Team 3, led by Eugene here, will focus on tracking, looking for any physical evidence of where the group might have gone. I paused, looking out at the assembled faces. Some were veterans, their expressions calm and professional. Others were newer, and I could see the nervous energy in their eyes. I need to be clear about something. This is a search and rescue operation, but it is also potentially a crime scene investigation. We do not know what happened to this group. Until we do, I want everyone to be cautious. Stay in contact with your team at all times. Do not wander off alone. Report anything unusual, no matter how insignificant it might seem, and trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. A hand went up near the back of the room. It was Margaret Chen, one of our newer rangers, barely 6 months on the job. What kind of unusual things should we be looking for? I hesitated, not wanting to alarm anyone, but knowing they deserve to be prepared. Anything that does not fit the normal patterns. Unusual markings on trees, strange sounds, evidence of wildlife behavior that seems off. And I glanced at Teresa, who gave me a small nod. There have been reports of unusual radio interference in the area. If your equipment starts acting up, note the time and location and report it immediately. The room was quiet. I could tell they wanted to ask more questions, but they also sensed that I was holding something back. Good people, all of them. They trusted me to tell them what they needed to know and to protect them from what they did not. I hoped I was worthy of that trust. We moved out at first light, the 3 teams fanning out across the wilderness in a coordinated search pattern. My team consisted of 5 people. Myself, Margaret Chen, 2 search and rescue volunteers named Thomas and Ruth, and a local man named Virgil who had hiked these trails since he was a boy. The morning air was cold and crisp, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your breath come out in thick white clouds. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the usual morning chorus of birds conspicuously absent. We reached the first campsite within 2 hours. It was exactly where it should be, a small clearing beside a stream, with a fire ring made of stones and a flat area suitable for tents. But there was something wrong. I crouched down beside the fire ring, examining the remains of a campfire. The ashes were old, at least several days, which was consistent with the timeline, but scattered among the ashes were personal belongings that no camper would leave behind. A wristwatch, its crystal cracked. A pair of reading glasses, one lens missing. A paperback book, its pages warped and stained by moisture. And a single hiking boot, the laces still tied. I picked up the boot and turned it over in my hands. It was a man's boot, size 11, well worn but still serviceable. There was no reason for someone to leave behind a single boot, unless they had left in a hurry, unless they had not had time to put it back on. Troy, over here. It was Margaret, calling from the far edge of the clearing. I set down the boot and walked over to where she was standing, staring at something on the ground. She pointed, and I felt my stomach clench. It was a trail of blood. Not much, just a few droplets on the leaves, but unmistakably blood, already dried to a dark brown color. The trail led away from the campsite, toward the denser forest to the north. "That is not the direction of the main trail," Virgil said, coming up beside us. His weathered face was troubled. Nothing that way but deep woods for miles. No established paths, no landmarks. If they went that direction, they went off route. Why would Chester take his group off the established trail? I wondered aloud. The answer, of course, was that he would not. Not willingly, not unless something had forced him to. We followed the blood trail, moving slowly, carefully, watching for any additional evidence. The forest grew denser as we went, the canopy overhead blocking out more and more of the morning light. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I found myself pulling my jacket tighter around my shoulders. The blood trail continued for about half a mile before it simply stopped. One moment there were droplets on the leaves, and the next there was nothing, as if whoever had been bleeding had simply vanished into thin air. We spread out, searching the immediate area for any additional signs. It was Ruth who found the first strange marking. She called us over to a large Douglas fir, its trunk easily 6 feet in diameter. At eye level, someone had carved something into the bark. Not carved exactly, more like scratched with fingernails or a sharp stone. The marks were crude, almost frantic, as if they had been made in a hurry, but they formed a recognizable pattern. It was a spiral that wound inward, tighter and tighter, until it reached a central point. And at that central point, there was a single word, scratched so deep into the bark that the pale wood beneath was exposed. Watching. I stared at that word for a long moment, remembering what Teresa had told me about Chester's transmission. The trees. They are watching. Ruth, take a photograph of this, I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too calm, too controlled. Document its exact location on the map. She nodded and pulled out her camera, but I noticed her hands were shaking. The rest of you, spread out, look for more markings, but stay within visual contact of at least one other team member at all times. We found 7 more spirals carved into trees within a 100-yard radius. Each one had a word at its center. Watching, listening, waiting, hungry, awake, coming. And the last one, carved into a tree that stood alone in a small clearing, deeper than all the others, the letters almost 2 inches tall. Run. I stood in front of that last marking, and I felt something I had not felt since I was a child, alone in the dark, certain that something was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I felt watched. Not by my team, not by any animal or human presence I could identify, but watched nonetheless, by something hidden in the shadows between the trees, something that had been there long before we arrived and would be there long after we left. We need to keep moving, Virgil said. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could see the whites of his eyes. We are losing daylight. He was right. In the mountains, daylight was precious, and we had already spent too much time examining the campsite and the strange markings. I made the call to continue the search, following what little trail evidence we could find. But as we pressed deeper into the forest, I could not shake the feeling that we were not the hunters in this equation. We were the hunted. The forest changed as we moved farther from the established trails. The trees grew older, their trunks thicker, their branches gnarled and twisted like arthritic fingers reaching toward the sky. The undergrowth became denser, tangled with ferns and fallen logs and the decaying remains of trees that had toppled decades ago. And the silence deepened, became almost oppressive, broken only by the sound of our own footsteps and breathing. We found the second campsite around midday. It was not an official campsite, not marked on any map. It was just a small depression between 2 massive boulders, barely large enough for a few tents. But someone had camped here recently. There were the remains of a fire, poorly made, as if by someone who had never built a campfire before. There were scattered food wrappers and empty water bottles, and there were tents, 3 of them, still standing, their flaps open, their contents in disarray. I approached the nearest tent and looked inside. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The interior of the tent had been destroyed, not just disturbed, but systematically torn apart. The sleeping bag had been shredded, the fabric hanging in ribbons. The backpack that lay in one corner had been ripped open, its contents scattered and crushed, and the walls of the tent were covered in more of those spiraling scratches, hundreds of them, overlapping and intersecting until the fabric was almost translucent from all the tiny holes. I backed out of the tent and moved to the next one. The same destruction, and the next, the same. But no bodies, no blood, no sign of what had actually happened to the people who had been sleeping here. "We need to call this in," Thomas said. He was a veteran of many search operations, a calm and steady presence, but even he looked shaken. "Base needs to know what we found." I nodded and reached for my radio, but when I pressed the transmit button, all I got was static. Strange, hissing static that seemed to pulse and surge in an almost rhythmic pattern. I adjusted the frequency, tried again. More static. "Teresa, this is Troy. Do you copy?" Nothing. Just that strange, breathing static. I tried every channel, every frequency. The result was always the same. Our radios were dead, or rather, not dead. receiving something, but not anything we could understand or respond to. We are too deep in the valley, Margaret suggested. The mountains might be blocking the signal. It was a reasonable explanation. Radio communication in mountainous terrain was always unreliable, but I had used this radio in valleys far deeper than this one, and it had never sounded like this. It had never sounded like something was breathing on the other end. We spread out to search the campsite more thoroughly, looking for any clue that might tell us what had happened and where the group might have gone next. It was Virgil who found the journal. It was wedged beneath one of the boulders, as if someone had hidden it there deliberately. The cover was plain brown leather, water-stained and worn. There was no name on it, no identification. I opened it carefully and began to read. The handwriting was neat and precise, clearly feminine. The first entry was dated 6 days ago, Friday. Started from Mowich Lake this morning. Perfect weather. Chester says we should make good time if it holds. The group is nice. Harold and Edna are sweet, clearly still in love after 40 years of marriage. Walter is quiet but knowledgeable about local plants. Dorothy takes photographs of everything, says she is working on a book. The Whitmore brothers are a bit loud but harmless, looking forward to the next 4 days. I turned the page. Saturday. Something strange last night. I woke around 2 a.m. needing to use the restroom. When I unzipped my tent, I saw lights in the forest. Not flashlights. These were different. Pale, almost blue, moving between the trees about 100 yards from camp. They did not bob or sway like someone walking. They glided, smooth and silent. I watched for maybe 5 minutes before they faded away. Did not mention it to the others this morning. Did not want to seem crazy. But Chester gave me a strange look at breakfast, like he knew something was bothering me. The next entry was longer, the handwriting slightly less controlled. Sunday. We are lost. I do not understand how it happened. Chester has hiked this trail hundreds of times. But somehow, we ended up somewhere that is not on the map. The landmarks do not match. The trail markers are gone. Chester tried his compass, but the needle just spins in circles. We made camp early, hoping to get our bearings in the morning, but the mood is tense. Harold is not feeling well. He says he has a headache, but I have seen him touching his ears, wincing like he is hearing something painful. And tonight, when the sun went down, the lights came back. This time, everyone saw them. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I turned to the next page. Monday. We tried to backtrack this morning, but the trail we came in on is gone. Not overgrown, not obscured, gone. Where there was a path yesterday, now there is only dense forest, as if the trail never existed at all. Edna had a breakdown. She kept screaming that the trees were moving, that when she was not looking directly at them, they were shifting position, closing in around us. Chester tried to calm her down, but I could see in his eyes that he was scared too. We are all scared. And last night the sound started. Whispers, not words, not exactly, but almost words. Like a language that is just slightly different from any language you have ever heard. Like something trying to speak, but not quite remembering how. The next entry was written in handwriting that was barely legible, the words scrawled at odd angles across the page. Tuesday. Clarence is gone. He went to gather firewood this morning and never came back. We searched for hours, calling his name. Nothing. But we found his jacket, hanging from a tree branch about 15 feet off the ground. How did it get there? How could it possibly have gotten there? Earl will not stop crying. Chester tried to use the radio to call for help, but something is wrong with it. There is something on the other end, listening. I can hear it breathing. I can hear it waiting. We have to get out of here. But the forest will not let us leave. There was one more entry, written in what looked like a different ink, darker, as if pressed harder into the page. Wednesday. It is in the camp now. I can see it standing at the edge of the firelight. It looks like a person, but it is too tall. Its arms are too long. Its face is wrong. I cannot look at it directly. When I try, my eyes slide away, like they are refusing to see what is really there. The others are asleep. Or maybe they are not asleep. Maybe they are something else now. I do not know. I do not know anything anymore. I am going to hide this journal. Maybe someone will find it. Maybe someone will understand what happened to us. If you are reading this, please, do not stay here after dark. Do not listen to the whispers, and whatever you do, do not look at the trees, because the trees are looking back. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Around me, my team stood in silence, watching, waiting for me to tell them what to do. I looked up at the sky, judging the position of the sun. We had maybe 4 hours of daylight left, not enough time to get back to the trailhead. We would have to make camp soon. Here, in these woods. these watching woods. We move, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We head east toward the established trail. We have maybe 2 hours before we need to stop and set up camp for the night. I want everyone to stay close. No one goes anywhere alone, not even to relieve themselves. Understood? They nodded, their faces pale. As we gathered our gear and prepared to move out, I slipped the journal into my pack. Evidence, I told myself, for the investigation. But part of me knew that was not the only reason. Part of me needed to keep those words close, needed to remind myself that I was not imagining things, that this was really happening, whatever this was. We hiked for nearly 2 hours, pushing through dense undergrowth, scrambling over fallen logs, wading through streams that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The forest remained stubbornly unfamiliar, the landmarks I knew from years of patrolling nowhere to be found. It was as if we had stepped through some invisible boundary into a version of Mount Rainier that existed only in nightmares. We made camp in a small clearing beside a rock outcropping that provided some shelter from the wind. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that should have been beautiful, but instead felt ominous, like the forest was bleeding. I assigned watches, 2-hour shifts, 2 people at a time. No one complained. No one wanted to be alone in the dark. I took the first watch with Virgil, the 2 of us sitting back to back on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, our flashlights and weapons within easy reach. For the first hour, nothing happened. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife conspicuously absent. I found myself straining to hear anything, any indication that we were not completely alone out here. Then, around 9 p.m., the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind rustling through the leaves, but there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, a low, susurrant murmur that seemed to seep from the shadows between the trees. I glanced at Virgil. His face was pale in the moonlight, his eyes wide. "You hear it too?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "It sounds like voices, almost like voices, trying to say something." We sat in tense silence, listening. The whispers continued, rising and falling in pitch, almost forming words but never quite resolving into anything comprehensible. It was maddening, like trying to understand a conversation happening in another room, just barely out of earshot. And then, without warning, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. It was the silence of something holding its breath, something waiting. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, the beam cutting through the darkness but revealing nothing but trees and shadows. But there was something there. I could feel it, a presence, massive and ancient and patient, watching us from just beyond the reach of the light. Virgil grabbed my arm suddenly, his grip tight enough to hurt. "There," he hissed. "At the edge of the trees. Do you see it?" I looked where he was pointing, and for a moment, I saw nothing. Just darkness and trees. But then, just for an instant, I caught a glimpse of something. A shape. Tall, impossibly tall, standing motionless between 2 massive firs. Its proportions were wrong, its limbs too long, its body too thin. And its face, if it had a face, was turned toward us. I blinked, and it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. We did not sleep that night. None of us did. We sat huddled around the fire, feeding it constantly, keeping the flames high and bright as if they could protect us from whatever was out there in the darkness. When dawn finally came, gray and cold, we broke camp in record time and continued our search. But I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones like ice, that we were no longer searching. We were being herded, guided by something that knew these woods far better than we ever could, led toward a destination we could not imagine and might not survive. The second day in the deep woods was worse than the first. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing denser, the undergrowth more tangled. We pushed through thickets that scratched at our skin and tore at our clothes, climbed over fallen logs slick with moss and decay, waded through streams whose waters ran unnaturally cold, and everywhere we went, we found signs of the missing group, a torn piece of clothing hanging from a branch, a crushed granola bar wrapper on the ground, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around the base of a tree. We followed these breadcrumbs deeper and deeper into the wilderness, and with each one we found, my sense of dread grew stronger. It was Margaret who spotted the cabin. We had emerged from a particularly dense section of forest into a small valley, and there it was, nestled against the base of a steep hillside. A cabin. Old, weathered, its logs gray with age, its roof covered in moss. But unmistakably a cabin, a human structure in the middle of nowhere. "That is not on any map," Virgil said. His voice was hushed, almost reverent. "I have been hiking these mountains for 50 years. I have never seen this place before." We approached cautiously, weapons drawn. The cabin appeared abandoned, its single window dark, its door hanging slightly open on rusted hinges. But as we got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the mud around the entrance. Fresh footprints. Multiple sets. Some going in, none coming out. I signaled for the team to spread out, covering the windows and the back of the structure. Then I approached the door, my flashlight in one hand, my pistol in the other. I pushed the door open with my foot and swept the beam of my flashlight across the interior. The smell hit me first. The thick, cloying stench of decay, of something organic rotting in an enclosed space. I gagged, fighting the urge to turn away, and forced myself to look. The cabin was a single room, maybe 15 feet by 20 feet. The walls were bare wood, uninsulated, the gaps between logs letting in thin streams of gray daylight. There was a rough wooden table in the center of the room, a cast iron stove in one corner, and a set of crudely built bunk beds against the far wall. And there were symbols, hundreds of them, carved into every surface. Spirals and circles and patterns that hurt to look at, that seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision. They covered the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They covered the furniture. They covered everything. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what was on the bunk beds. There were bodies, 3 of them, lying side by side, their hands folded neatly on their chests, their eyes closed as if in peaceful sleep. But their skin was gray, almost blue, and their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror. I recognized them from the photographs Teresa had shown me during the briefing. Harold and Edna Patterson, and Dorothy Shaw. I stepped closer, forcing myself to examine the bodies. There were no visible wounds. No obvious cause of death. They simply looked like they had lain down on those beds and never gotten up again. Like something had frightened them so badly that their hearts had simply stopped. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Margaret standing in the doorway, her face pale, her hand pressed over her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, what happened to them?" "I do not know," I said. "But we need to document this and keep moving. There are still 4 people unaccounted for." We photographed the scene from every angle, noting the position of the bodies, the strange symbols on the walls, every detail that might help us understand what had happened. Then we searched the cabin for any clues that might lead us to the remaining missing persons. It was Thomas who found the trapdoor. It was hidden beneath a tattered rug near the cast iron stove, its edges barely visible against the rough wooden floor. He called us over, and together we pulled the door open. A rush of cold air hit us, carrying with it a smell of earth and dampness and something else, something organic and alien that I could not identify. Below the trapdoor was a wooden ladder, leading down into darkness. I shone my flashlight into the hole, but the beam was swallowed by the shadows before it could reveal what lay below. "Someone has been down there recently," Thomas said. He pointed to the ladder rungs, which were smeared with mud and what looked like dried blood. "And those are drag marks leading to the edge." I looked at my team. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear, but they were professionals, and they knew what had to be done. "I will go down first," I said. "Margaret, you follow me. Thomas, Virgil, Ruth, stay up here. Keep watch. If we are not back in 30 minutes, get out and call for backup." They nodded, though I could see they wanted to argue. I gave them what I hoped was a reassuring look. Then I started down the ladder. The descent was longer than I expected, at least 20 feet. The walls of the shaft were rough-hewn rock, damp with moisture that seeped from somewhere underground. The smell grew stronger as I went down, that strange organic odor mixing with the cold earthen smell of deep underground. When my feet finally touched solid ground, I found myself in a tunnel. It was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast, and it stretched away into darkness in both directions. The walls were covered in more of those spiraling symbols, carved deep into the rock, and they seemed to glow faintly in the beam of my flashlight, though that had to be a trick of the light. Margaret landed beside me a moment later, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Which way?" she whispered. I looked left, then right. Both directions looked equally ominous, equally unknown. But then I noticed something on the ground, leading to the right. More drag marks, and more blood. This way. We followed the tunnel for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening into small chambers, sometimes narrowing until we had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The symbols on the walls became more elaborate as we went deeper, more complex, until they formed what almost looked like pictures, images of things I could not quite make out, but that filled me with a nameless dread. And then we heard the voices, not whispers this time, actual voices, human voices, speaking in tones of terror and desperation. "Help us, please. Someone help us. They are coming back. Please, you have to help us." I broke into a run, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted down the tunnel toward the source of the sounds. I rounded a corner and skidded to a halt, my breath catching in my throat. It was a chamber, a large chamber at least 50 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. And in the center of the chamber, huddled together like frightened animals, were 4 people: Chester Millwood, Walter Fleming, and the Whitmore brothers, Earl and Clarence. They were alive. The survivors were in bad shape, dehydrated, malnourished, covered in cuts and bruises and what looked like claw marks, long parallel scratches that ran down their arms and legs. But they were alive, and when they saw us, they broke down in tears of relief. "Thank God," Chester rasped. His voice was raw, barely above a whisper. "I thought no one would ever find us. I thought we were going to die down here." I knelt beside him, offering him water from my canteen. "What happened?" I asked. "Where is the rest of your group?" Chester's face crumbled. "Dead. They are all dead. It took them, one by one. It would come at night when we were sleeping. It would take them, and we would hear them screaming. But we could never find them. We could never help them. And then yesterday it brought them back. It brought their bodies back. It left them in that cabin, arranged them like they were sleeping, and then it—" He broke off, unable to continue. "It is still here," Earl whispered. He was younger than his brother, maybe early 30s, with a scraggly beard and eyes that held a haunted, broken look. "It lives in these tunnels. It has been here for a long time, maybe forever, and it is not done with us yet." "What is it?" Margaret asked. "What did you see?" The survivors exchanged glances, and in their eyes I saw something that chilled me to the bone. I saw the look of people who had witnessed something that their minds refused to fully process, something that violated every law of nature and reason that they had ever known. "I do not know what it is," Chester said finally. "It looks different every time. Sometimes it looks almost human. Sometimes it looks like shadows and teeth and eyes. And sometimes it looks like the forest itself, like the trees are alive and hungry and reaching for us. But I know what it wants." I waited. "It wants us to stay," he said. "It wants us to be part of this place, to become like the others." I did not ask what others he meant. I was not sure I wanted to know. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Can you walk?" They could, barely. We helped them to their feet and began the long journey back through the tunnels, back toward the ladder in the cabin and the surface world above. But we had only gone a few hundred feet when we heard it. A sound, deep and resonant, like a massive bell tolling somewhere in the earth below us. It vibrated through the rock walls, through the floor, through our very bones. And in the wake of that sound, the whispers began again, louder this time, more urgent. Almost words, almost comprehensible, but not quite. And they were coming from everywhere, from the walls, from the ceiling, from the darkness ahead of us and behind us. We ran. There was no other option. We ran through those twisting tunnels, half carrying the survivors, our flashlights bouncing wildly, our shadows dancing on the walls like living things. Behind us, I could hear something following, something large, something that moved through the darkness with a fluid, inhuman grace. I did not look back. I did not dare. We reached the ladder and scrambled up, one after another, pulling and pushing the survivors who were too weak to climb on their own. Margaret went first, then Chester, then the Whitmore brothers, then Walter. I went last, and as I climbed, I felt something brush against my ankle. Cold, impossibly cold, and somehow wet, like touching raw meat that had been left in a freezer. I kicked out instinctively and felt my boot connect with something solid. There was a sound, a high-pitched shriek that echoed through the shaft and seemed to pierce directly into my brain. And then I was through the trapdoor, rolling onto the cabin floor, and Thomas was slamming the door shut behind me. "Go!" I shouted. "Everyone out now!" We did not need to be told twice. We burst out of the cabin and into the gray daylight, and we ran. We ran without looking back, without stopping, without caring about direction or destination. We just ran. And behind us, from the cabin, from the forest, from everywhere and nowhere, I heard that sound again. That deep, resonant tolling. And underneath it, like a harmony from hell, the whispers. Whispering our names. We ran until we could not run anymore, until our lungs burned and our legs gave out and we collapsed in a heap in a small clearing miles from the cabin. The sun was setting again, the shadows lengthening, and I knew we did not have long before full darkness fell. I forced myself to my feet and began organizing camp. We had no tents, no proper supplies, just the emergency gear in our packs. But we made do. We built a fire, a big one, and we huddled around it like prehistoric humans, drawing comfort from the flames, from the light that pushed back the encroaching darkness. The survivors told us their story in halting, fragmented sentences. They told us how the forest had seemed to change around them, how trails had vanished and landmarks had shifted. They told us about the lights in the night, the whispers, the growing sense that they were being watched by something vast and malevolent. They told us about the first disappearance, and the second, and the third. About finding the bodies, arranged neatly, peacefully, as if death had been a mercy. And they told us about the thing in the tunnels, the thing that had hunted them through the darkness, that had toyed with them, that had seemed to take pleasure in their fear. They did not describe it in detail. They could not. Every time they tried, their words would falter, their eyes would glaze over, and they would start to tremble uncontrollably. Whatever they had seen down there, it had broken something inside them, something that might never heal. We took turns keeping watch throughout the night. The whispers came and went, sometimes barely audible, sometimes so loud they seemed to drown out our own thoughts. But nothing emerged from the darkness, nothing that we could see anyway. Though more than once I caught glimpses of movement at the edge of the firelight, shapes that were too tall, too thin, too wrong to be human. Shapes that watched and waited and did not move when I shone my flashlight directly at them. When dawn finally came, it felt like a reprieve from a death sentence. We packed up quickly, efficiently, and began the long trek back toward civilization. I had given up on finding the established trail. Instead, I navigated by compass and instinct, heading generally east, toward where I knew the park headquarters had to be. But the forest did not make it easy. Trees that should not have been there blocked our path. Streams appeared where no streams were marked on any map. And more than once, I could have sworn we passed the same distinctive boulder or fallen log twice, as if the forest was looping back on itself, trying to keep us trapped. It took us 3 days to find our way out. 3 days of exhausting hiking, of rationed food and water, of nights spent huddled around fires that never seemed bright enough. 3 days of whispers and shadows and the constant, overwhelming sense that something was following us, watching us, waiting for the moment we let our guard down. On the 3rd day, we emerged from the tree line onto a gravel road that I recognized. It was a maintenance road used by Park Service vehicles, and it led directly to the Moich Lake trailhead. I have never been so happy to see a gravel road in my life. We reached the ranger station that evening. Teresa was there, along with Eugene and the other search teams who had been looking for us. When they saw us emerge from the forest, haggard and hollow-eyed, with 4 survivors in tow, there were tears and embraces and a flood of questions. I answered as best I could, but I knew even as I spoke that my words were inadequate. How do you describe something like what we had experienced? How do you explain the inexplicable? The survivors were taken to the hospital, treated for their physical injuries, evaluated for psychological trauma. The official report listed their ordeal as the result of getting lost in the backcountry, of dehydration and exposure leading to hallucinations and confusion. A tragic accident. A cautionary tale. No mention was made of the cabin, or the tunnels, or the thing that had hunted them through the darkness. No mention was made of the 3 bodies we had found, which search teams were unable to locate when they returned to the area a week later. The cabin, they reported, was gone, as if it had never existed at all. I did not argue with the official report. I did not try to convince anyone of what I had seen. What would be the point? Some things are not meant to be believed. Some things are not meant to be understood. They are only meant to be survived. That was 6 months ago. I still work for the Park Service, still patrol these forests every day. But something has changed. I notice things now that I never noticed before. The way the shadows move when there is no wind. The way certain groves of trees seem to watch me as I pass. The way the radio sometimes crackles with static that sounds almost like whispers. Chester Millwood retired. He sold his house, moved to Arizona, said he never wanted to see a forest again as long as he lived. I understand the feeling. The Whitmore brothers do not talk to each other anymore. Earl told me once that every time he looks at his brother, he sees the thing from the tunnels looking back at him. Walter Fleming went back to teaching, but his students say he is different now. Quieter, more distant. He never turns his back to the windows. I keep the journal from the campsite locked in a drawer in my cabin. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and read through those final entries. The handwriting of a woman who knew she was going to die, who had witnessed something that defied all rational explanation. I never learned her name. There was no Dorothy Shaw listed in the official records of the missing group. No evidence that she had ever existed at all. But I have her words, and I have my memories, and I have the certainty, deep in my bones, that what I experienced in those woods was real. The thing in the forest, the thing in the tunnels, it is still out there, still waiting, still watching. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is dark enough, I can almost hear it calling my name. I have learned to live with that knowledge, to carry it with me like a stone in my pocket, a constant weight that never quite goes away. Because that is what happens when you survive something like what we survived. You do not move on. You do not forget. You just learn to carry it, and you hope, with every fiber of your being, that it never comes calling again. The park closed the Wonderland Trail near Moich Lake for 2 months after our return. Official reason given was trail damage from spring flooding. Unofficial reason was that 3 more hikers went missing in that area in the weeks following our rescue, and the search teams sent to find them reported the same strange phenomena we had experienced. Radios that filled with static and whispers. Trails that seemed to shift and change, and in one case, a ranger who claimed to have seen a figure standing at the edge of his campsite at night, watching him with eyes that reflected no light. The trail reopened eventually. It always does. The Park Service cannot afford to keep popular trails closed indefinitely, and the official explanations, however inadequate, seem to satisfy the public. But I noticed that certain rangers refused to patrol that area anymore, that certain maintenance routes were quietly reassigned, that there was an unspoken understanding among the old-timers that some parts of the mountain were best left alone. I tried to research the history of the area, hoping to find some explanation for what we had encountered. What I found only deepened the mystery. The Native American tribes who had lived in this region for thousands of years had names for certain places on the mountain. Names that translated to phrases like where the spirits walk and the hungry forest and the place of watching eyes. They had stories too. Stories of hunters who ventured into certain valleys and never returned. Stories of shapes that moved between the trees on moonless nights. Stories of a presence, ancient and patient and not quite malevolent, but certainly not benevolent either, that claimed certain parts of the mountain as its own. And they had warnings that were passed down from generation to generation, embedded in their culture like survival instincts. Do not camp alone in certain places. Do not look at certain things directly. Do not speak certain names aloud after dark. I found references to similar phenomena in the journals of early European explorers and settlers. Accounts of expeditions that vanished without a trace. Reports of strange lights and sounds in the wilderness. Descriptions of structures, cabins, and foundations and carved stones that seemed to appear and disappear at random, that were never in the same place twice. And through it all, a common thread. A sense that there was something in these mountains that predated human habitation. Something that had been here when the first people arrived, and would still be here long after the last person left. Something that watched and waited, and occasionally, when the mood struck it, reached out to touch the human world in ways that left scars on everyone involved. I do not know what that something is. I have theories, of course. Everyone who has experienced what I experienced develops theories. Some of my colleagues believe it is a natural phenomenon, some kind of electromagnetic anomaly or geological formation that affects human perception and cognition. Others think it is something psychological, a collective hallucination triggered by stress and isolation and the primal fear of the wilderness that all humans carry in their genes. And some, the ones who have seen it up close, believe it is something else entirely, something that does not fit into any category we have words for, something outside our understanding of how the universe works. I lean toward that last theory, though I know how crazy it sounds, because I have seen things in these woods that cannot be explained by science or psychology. I have felt the presence of something vast and ancient and aware, and I have heard the whispers, the almost words that seem to carry meaning just beyond the edge of comprehension. Whatever it is real. And it is still out there. A year after the incident, I received a letter. It came to the ranger station, addressed to me by name, with no return address. The envelope was old, yellowed with age, and the stamps were vintage, dating back to the 1950s. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in an elegant, old-fashioned script. It read, "You found the cabin. You went into the tunnels. You heard the whispers and saw the shapes and felt the cold touch of something that should not exist. You are not the first, and you will not be the last." The mountain has many secrets, Ranger Troy. Secrets that go back further than human memory, further than human understanding. You survived because it allowed you to survive, because it was not yet hungry, because it was curious about you, about all of you, and wanted to see what you would do. But curiosity fades, and hunger returns. Be careful in the dark places, Ranger Troy. Be careful what you see and what you hear and what you believe. Because belief is a door, and once you open it, you can never close it again. The watching ones are always watching. And someday, when the time is right, they will come for what they are owed. There was no signature, no indication of who had sent it or how they knew my name or what had happened to us in those woods. I showed the letter to Teresa, who had no explanation. I showed it to Eugene, who simply shook his head and told me to burn it. I did not burn it. I keep it with the journal, in the locked drawer in my cabin. More evidence, I tell myself. More documentation of the inexplicable. But really, I think I keep it because it makes me feel less alone. Because it tells me that others have experienced what I experienced. That others have seen the watching ones, heard the whispers, survived the touch of something from beyond the edge of human understanding. I am not special. I am not chosen. I am just one of many. A single drop in a long stream of people who have wandered too deep into the dark places and emerged, changed, haunted, marked. 2 years after the incident, Chester Millwood died. Heart attack, the official report said. Natural causes. He was found in his apartment in Phoenix, sitting in a chair facing the window, his eyes wide open, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. When I heard the news, I was not surprised. I had known somehow that Chester would never be free of what we had experienced, that the mountain had marked him in ways that went deeper than physical scars, that he was one of them now. One of the lost, even though his body had escaped. I attended his funeral. It was a small affair, just a handful of former colleagues and distant relatives. At the reception afterward, his sister approached me. She was an older woman, thin and tired-looking, with Chester's eyes. "You were there," she said, "in the mountains, when it happened." I nodded. "He talked about you," she said. "In the end, he said you were strong, stronger than he was. He said you could hear the whispers and not let them in." I did not know what to say to that. "He left something for you," she continued. She handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. "He said you would know what to do with it." I opened the box later, alone in my cabin. Inside was Chester's compass, the one that had spun in circles in the deep woods, the one that had refused to point north. But now, when I held it in my hand, the needle moved. It swung slowly, deliberately, until it pointed not north, not south, but directly toward the window, toward the mountain, toward Mowich Lake. I understood then what Chester was trying to tell me. The connection we had forged with that place, with whatever lived there, was not something that could be broken. It was permanent, eternal, a thread that stretched across time and space, linking us to the watching ones forever. I put the compass in the drawer with the journal and the letter. More evidence, more reminders, more weight to carry. 5 years have passed since the incident on the Wonderland Trail. 5 years of nightmares and sleepless nights, and the constant gnawing sense that something is following me, watching me, waiting for the right moment to reach out and touch me again. I have learned to live with it. Most days, I barely notice anymore. The fear has become like background noise, a constant hum that I have trained myself to ignore. But there are moments. Moments when the radio crackles with static that sounds like whispers. Moments when I catch a glimpse of something at the edge of my vision, tall and wrong and watching. Moments when I wake in the middle of the night, certain that something is standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes reflecting no light. In those moments, the fear comes flooding back, raw and primal and overwhelming. And I remember that I am not safe. None of us are. Because the watching ones are always watching, and they are patient. They have been waiting for thousands of years, maybe millions. They can wait a little longer. I tell myself this is just paranoia, just the after effects of trauma, the way a soldier flinches at loud noises long after the war is over. But I know better. I have seen what is out there, in the dark places of the mountain. I have felt its attention on me, cold and vast and utterly alien. And I know that someday it will come for me, maybe tomorrow. Maybe next year, maybe decades from now when I am old and weak and unable to run. But it will come. And when it does, I will not be able to escape. No one escapes. Not really. Chester did not escape. He just got a few extra years. A few more breaths. A few more sunrises before the darkness finally claimed him. I expect the same. We all expect the same. Those of us who have been touched by the mountain. We carry our survival like a temporary reprieve, a stay of execution that can be revoked at any moment. And we wait. That is all we can do. Wait and watch and hope that when the end comes, it comes quickly. But here is the thing about fear. It does not last forever. Even the deepest terror fades with time, becomes manageable, becomes almost comfortable. You learn to live alongside it, like a chronic illness or a difficult neighbor. It shapes you, changes you, becomes part of who you are. And eventually, you realize that the fear is not just a burden, it is a gift, a reminder that you are still alive, that you survived something that should have killed you, that you looked into the face of the unknown and came back to tell the story. That is what I tell myself anyway. On the good days, on the bad days, I just try to get through until morning. I still work for the Park Service, still patrol these forests, still help lost hikers find their way home. I am good at my job. Maybe better than I was before, because now I know what is really out there. I know the dangers that do not appear on any map, the threats that cannot be quantified or prepared for. And I know that my job is not just to rescue people from the wilderness. It is to protect them from the things that live in the spaces between the trees, the things that watch and wait and whisper in the dark. New rangers sometimes ask me about the incident. They have heard rumors, fragments of stories passed down through the grapevine. They want to know what really happened out there, what I saw, what I believe. I tell them the official story: lost hikers, bad weather, tragic accident. I do not tell them about the cabin or the tunnels or the thing that hunted us through the darkness. Some things are not meant to be shared. Some knowledge is too heavy to pass on. Better to let them believe in a safe, rational world. Better to let them think the only dangers out here are bears and hypothermia and getting lost. They will find out the truth eventually if they stay in these mountains long enough. Everyone does. And when they come to me, hollow-eyed and shaking, trying to explain something they saw that defied all explanation, I will be there to listen, to nod, to tell them they are not crazy. That is my real job now. Not rescuing bodies, but rescuing minds. Helping people process the unprocessable. Showing them that it is possible to carry the weight of the impossible and still keep walking, because that is what we do. Those of us who have been touched by the watching ones, we keep walking, we keep breathing, we keep going through the motions of a normal life, even though we know that nothing will ever be normal again. And we hope. Hope that the darkness stays in the dark places. Hope that the whispers stay just beyond the edge of hearing. Hope that the watching ones stay content to watch, and do not decide to reach out and touch us again. It is not much, but it is enough. It has to be enough. The summer after the 5th anniversary, something changed. I noticed it first in the small things. The way the shadows seemed darker than they should be. The way the animals in the forest were more skittish, more prone to fleeing at the slightest sound. The way the radios picked up more static, more interference, more of those almost words that haunted my nightmares. Then the reports started coming in. Hikers on the Wonderland Trail reporting strange experiences. Lights in the woods at night. Sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The sense of being watched, followed, hunted by something they could not see. 3 people went missing in June. 2 more in July. And in August, an entire Boy Scout troop vanished from their campsite near Moich Lake, leaving behind nothing but their tents and supplies and a single spiral carved into the bark of a nearby tree. The Park Service launched a massive search operation. Hundreds of personnel, helicopters, dogs, every resource we had. We searched for 3 weeks, covering every inch of the surrounding wilderness. We found nothing, not a single trace, not a single clue, just empty forest and the endless whisper of the wind through the trees, and the watching. Always the watching. I could feel it stronger than ever now. That vast, patient attention focused on our efforts like a child watching ants scramble around their crushed anthill. It was not malevolent exactly. More like curious, interested, amused by our futile attempts to find what could not be found. The official explanation was a freak storm, a sudden weather event that swept the boys away before they could reach shelter. Tragic, unforeseeable, a reminder of the dangers of the wilderness. The parents did not believe it. How could they? But there was nothing else to tell them, nothing that would make sense, nothing that would help. I attended the memorial service. Stood at the back of the church, watching families weep for children who would never come home. And I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Anger. Not at the watching ones. You cannot be angry at a force of nature, at something so far beyond human understanding that emotion itself becomes meaningless. but anger at myself. For knowing what was out there and not being able to stop it. For carrying this knowledge like a secret shame, when maybe, just maybe, if I had spoken up sooner, those boys might still be alive. But even as I thought it, I knew it was foolish. There was nothing I could have done. Nothing anyone could have done. The watching ones take what they want, when they want it. We are not players in their game. We are pieces, pawns, snacks. That night, I made a decision. I would go back to Mowich Lake, not as part of an official search, not with a team of rangers and volunteers. Just me, alone, with nothing but my pack and my weapon and 20 years of experience in these woods. I would find the cabin, I would go into the tunnels, and I would try, one more time, to understand what was happening on this mountain. It was stupid, suicidal, probably, but I was tired of waiting, tired of watching, tired of being a passive participant in a horror story that had no end. If the watching ones wanted me, they could have me. But I was not going to make it easy for them. I was going to look them in the eye. I was going to demand answers. And if I died in the attempt, at least I would die doing something. At least I would die fighting. I told Teresa I was taking a week of personal leave. She looked at me with those knowing eyes, the eyes of someone who has seen too much and learned to stop asking questions. "Be careful, Troy," she said. "Whatever you are planning, be careful." "I will," I lied. I set out on a Monday morning, just as the sun was rising over the mountain. The trail to Mowich Lake was familiar, a path I had walked hundreds of times over the years. But it felt different now. Charged. Electric. Like the air before a thunderstorm. I made good time, reaching the lake by early afternoon. The water was still, mirror smooth, reflecting the sky and the surrounding peaks with perfect clarity. It was beautiful, peaceful, and utterly wrong. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No birds, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, just the sound of my own breathing and the soft lap of water against the shore. I made camp at the official campsite, setting up my tent and building a small fire. As darkness fell, I sat by the flames and waited. I did not have to wait long. The whispers started around midnight. Soft at first, barely audible, like the murmur of a distant conversation. But they grew louder as the hours passed, more insistent, more urgent. And this time, I did not try to block them out. I listened, really listened, for the first time since that terrible week 5 years ago. And slowly, gradually, I began to understand. Not the words themselves. The whispers were not in any human language, but the meaning behind them, the intent, the emotion. They were not threatening. They were not malevolent. They were curious, interested, welcoming even, in a strange, alien way. They wanted me to come. They wanted to show me something. They wanted me to understand. I stood up from the fire, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, guiding me, leading me away from the campsite and into the dark forest beyond. I followed without hesitation. The whispers led me through the trees, along paths that seemed to appear just as I needed them and vanish just as quickly. The forest shifted and changed around me, the landmarks I knew replaced by unfamiliar groves and clearings that seemed to glow with a faint inner light. And then, suddenly, I was there. The cabin. It stood before me, exactly as I remembered it, old, weathered, covered in moss. But this time, there was a light in the window, a warm, golden glow that spilled out into the darkness like a beacon. I approached slowly, my hand on my weapon, every sense alert for danger. But the whispers had faded to a gentle murmur, almost soothing, almost friendly, as if they were telling me there was nothing to fear. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was different than before. Gone were the bodies, the symbols, the overwhelming stench of death. Instead, the room was warm, comfortable, almost cozy. A fire crackled in the cast iron stove. A pot of something fragrant simmered on top. And sitting at the rough wooden table, as if she had been waiting for me, was an old woman. She looked ancient, impossibly ancient. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her hair white and thin, her eyes milky with cataracts. But she smiled when she saw me, a warm, grandmotherly smile that seemed utterly out of place in this strange and terrible location. "Sit down, Ranger Troy," she said. Her voice was soft, papery, like the rustle of dead leaves. "You have come a long way. I have been waiting." I sat. I do not know why. Maybe because the alternative was to flee screaming into the night. Maybe because some part of me recognized that this was why I had come, to find answers, to understand. The old woman poured 2 cups of tea from a chipped ceramic pot and slid one across the table toward me. I did not drink it. "You have questions," she said. "Everyone who comes here has questions, but the answers are not always what you expect." I found my voice. "Who are you?" "I am a caretaker," she said. "A keeper of the threshold. I have had many names over the years, but none of them matter. What matters is the place. The mountain. The watching ones." "What are they?" I asked. The question I had been carrying for 5 years, finally spoken aloud. She smiled again, but this time there was something sad in it, something ancient and weary. "They are what was here before," she said, "before the tribes. Before the animals, before the trees themselves. They are the original inhabitants of this place, the ones who were born when the mountain first rose from the earth. They are not good or evil, they simply are. Like the wind, like the rain, like time itself. Then why do they take people? Why do they hunt and kill and terrify?" She shook her head. "They do not hunt. They do not kill. They collect. They take what interests them, what catches their attention, and they keep it, preserve it, study it for eternity. The ones who are taken are not dead. They are just elsewhere, in a place that human minds cannot comprehend." I thought of the bodies in the cabin, Harold and Edna Patterson, Dorothy Shaw, their faces frozen in terror. "Those were dead," I said. "I saw them. I touched them. Their bodies died," the old woman agreed. "But their essences, their selves, are still with the watching ones, still being studied, still being experienced. I do not know if that is better or worse than oblivion. I do not know if anything is." I felt sick, horrified, but also, strangely, relieved. Because at least now I knew. At least now I understood what had been haunting me for all these years. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you came back," she said. "Because you had the courage to face the darkness instead of running from it. The watching ones respect that. They have marked you as one of theirs, but they have also marked you as worthy, as someone who might be able to bridge the gap between our world and theirs." "What does that mean?" "It means you have a choice, Ranger Troy. You can leave here tonight, go back to your life, and live out your remaining years in peace. The watching ones will not trouble you again. Your debt is paid." She paused, her milky eyes somehow meeting mine with perfect precision. "Or you can stay. Learn what I know. Become a caretaker yourself, a keeper of the threshold, a guide for those who wander too deep into the dark places and need help finding their way back." It was not much of a choice, not really. I thought about my life, my career, the endless patrols through forests that no longer felt safe or welcoming. I thought about the weight I had been carrying, the fear that never quite went away. And I thought about Chester Millwood, dying alone in his apartment, his eyes wide with terror, still running from something he could never escape. I did not want to end up like Chester. I did not want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the darkness to catch up with me. But more than that, I wanted to help. I wanted to protect the people who came to these mountains seeking beauty and adventure and connection with nature. I wanted to be a guide, a guardian, a keeper of the threshold, even if it meant giving up everything I had known, even if it meant becoming something other than human. I reached across the table and took the old woman's hand. It was cold, impossibly cold, like touching something that had been dead for centuries. But there was strength in that grip, strength and purpose and a strange, timeless wisdom. "Teach me," I said. She smiled, and the whispers rose around us like a chorus, welcoming me home. That was 3 years ago. I am still a ranger, technically. I still wear the uniform, still patrol the trails, still help lost hikers find their way back to civilization. But I am other things now, too. Things that do not have names in any human language. Things that exist in the spaces between what is known and what is feared. The old woman is gone. She passed through the threshold a few months after we met, her work finally done after centuries of service. I found her body in the cabin one morning, sitting peacefully at the table, a gentle smile on her ancient face. I buried her beneath a Douglas fir at the edge of the clearing, marked the grave with a stone carved with one of the symbols the watching ones use. She had taught me so much about the history of the mountain and the beings who inhabit it, about the rituals and practices that keep the boundaries stable, about the responsibility of being a keeper of the threshold, a bridge between two worlds that were never meant to touch. And she taught me about the watching ones themselves, They are not what I expected. Not monsters, not demons, not malevolent spirits seeking to harm humanity. They are something older, something stranger, something that exists outside our categories of good and evil. They watch because that is their nature. They collect because they are curious. They preserve the things they take because they want to understand, to experience, to know what it means to be human in a way that is impossible for beings like them. It does not make what they do right. It does not excuse the suffering they have caused, the families they have destroyed, the lives they have cut short. But it helps me understand, and understanding is the first step toward finding balance. I have found ways to communicate with them, not through words, but through symbols, through rituals, through acts of intent that they can perceive and respond to. I have negotiated, bartered, pleaded with them to show restraint, to take only those who wander too deep, too far, too willingly into the dark places, to leave the innocent alone. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they do not, but more often than not, I can feel their attention on me when I make my requests. I can feel them considering, weighing, deciding, and more often than not, they choose to show mercy. The disappearances have slowed, not stopped entirely, but slowed. The Boy Scout troop was the last major incident. Since then, only a handful of solitary hikers have vanished, all of them in places where the boundaries are thin, all of them after ignoring warnings that any sensible person would have heeded. I tell myself, it is progress. I tell myself I am making a difference, but deep down, I know the truth. The watching ones are ancient. They have been here for millions of years and will be here for millions more. My influence is temporary. My negotiations are a drop in an endless ocean. Someday, when I am gone, the balance will shift again, the taking will resume, and another keeper will have to be found to stand in the gap. But that is a problem for another day. For now, I do what I can. I patrol the trails. I guide the lost back to safety. I perform the rituals that keep the boundaries stable, and I listen to the whispers, always present now, a constant companion in my mind. Sometimes they tell me things, warn me of dangers, guide me to people who need help, share glimpses of knowledge that no human has ever possessed. Sometimes they simply watch, a vast, patient attention that I have learned to accept rather than fear. I am not human anymore, not entirely. The threshold changes everyone who crosses it, marks them in ways that cannot be undone. I do not age the way I used to. I do not feel cold or hunger or fatigue the way I once did. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see something behind my eyes that was not there before. Something ancient, something watching. But I am still Troy, still the ranger who set out into the wilderness all those years ago, determined to find answers. Still the man who faced the darkness and chose to become part of it rather than run from it. I do not regret my choice. The fear is still there sometimes. The nightmares still come. But they are quieter now, more manageable. I have made peace with the mountain and the things that live within it. I have found my purpose, my place in the endless cycle of watching and being watched. And when my time finally comes, when the watching ones decide to collect me and add me to their eternal archive, I will go willingly. I will cross the threshold one last time and become part of something vast and strange and incomprehensible. I will be studied, preserved, experienced, and maybe, in some way that human language cannot express, I will understand at last what the watching ones have been trying to teach me all along. The mountain keeps its secrets. It always has. It always will. But now, I am one of those secrets. A keeper of the threshold. A guardian of the gap between worlds. And if you ever find yourself on the Wonderland Trail near Moich Lake, if you ever feel the whispers at the edge of your hearing or catch a glimpse of something tall and wrong standing at the edge of the trees, do not be afraid. Well, be a little afraid. Fear is healthy. Fear keeps you alive. But know that there is someone watching over you, someone who understands what waits in the darkness and has learned to walk alongside it, someone who will do everything in their power to guide you back to the light. That someone is me. And I will be watching the end, or rather, the beginning, because in these mountains, nothing ever truly ends. The watching ones have been here since before the first breath of wind stirred the first leaf on the first tree. They will be here long after the last human voice falls silent. And between now and then, there is work to be done, boundaries to maintain, thresholds to guard, lost souls to guide home. This is my purpose now, my calling, my gift, and my curse, wrapped together in an endless spiral that winds ever deeper into the heart of the unknown. I would not have it any other way. The radio crackles, Teresa's voice tight with urgency. "Troy, you copy?" We have got missing hikers. I press the transmit button. Copy that, Teresa. Where? The static clears for a moment, just long enough for me to hear her answer. Wonderland Trail, near Mowich Lake. I smile. I cannot help it. Some things never change. On my way, I say. And I am walking before the words are even out of my mouth, moving through the forest with the easy grace of someone who has learned its secrets, heading toward another rescue, another encounter, another chance to bridge the gap between worlds. The whispers rise around me like old friends, welcoming me back to the threshold. And somewhere in the depths of the watching darkness, I sense a vast, patient attention turning toward me, curious, interested, approving. Good luck, Ranger Troy, the mountain seems to say. May you find what you are looking for. I do not answer. I do not need to. We understand each other now, the mountain and I. We are partners in an ancient dance, bound together by purpose and necessity and something that might, in the right light, be called love. And so I walk on, into the shadows, into the unknown, into the endless mystery that waits at the edge of every map, just beyond the last marked trail. The forest closes around me like a living thing. The whispers guide my steps, and the watching ones watch, as they always have, as they always will, until the end of time and beyond. This is my story. The story of a ranger who wandered too deep and found something that changed him forever. The story of a mountain that keeps its secrets and guards them jealously. The story of the watching ones, ancient and patient and eternally curious about the small, brief lives that flicker and fade in the shadows of their domain. But it is also your story. Because the wilderness is not just a place on a map, it is a state of mind. A threshold that exists wherever the unknown brushes against the known. And sooner or later, we all find ourselves standing at that threshold, looking into the darkness, wondering what looks back. When that moment comes, remember what I have told you. Remember the whispers and the watchers and the keeper of the threshold. Remember that there is more to this world than what you can see and measure and explain. And remember that fear, while necessary, is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of wisdom. It is the first step toward understanding. It is the door that leads, if you are brave enough to open it, to places beyond imagining. Walk carefully, my friends. Watch where you step and what you say and where you shine your light. The wilderness is beautiful, but it is not safe. It has never been safe. And in the deepest, darkest places, where the trees grow tall and the shadows grow deep and the whispers never stop, something is always watching, something ancient, something patient, something that knows your name, the end. That night, the forest fell into an unnatural silence, as if something had forced it to stop breathing. I have been a ranger at Grim Hollow National Forest for 31 years, and in all that time, I believed I understood these woods. I knew their rhythms, their sounds, their secrets. I was wrong. What descended upon us in the autumn of 1983 shattered everything I thought I knew about nature, about predators, about the thin membrane separating our world from something far older and more terrible. My name is Roscoe Pemberton, and this is my account of the events that unfolded in those blood-soaked weeks. Events that the official reports buried beneath layers of bureaucratic lies. Events that still jolt me awake in the dead of night, drenched in cold sweat, listening for footsteps that should not exist. Grim Hollow National Forest sprawls across 52,000 acres of dense, primeval woodland in the most remote reaches of the Appalachian Mountains. The trees here are ancient beyond measure. Towering hemlocks and red oaks that have stood sentinel since before this nation drew its first breath. Their canopy grows so thick and intertwined that sunlight becomes a stranger to the forest floor, creating a world of perpetual twilight where moss blankets every surface in shades of green, so dark they appear almost black. The undergrowth tangles upon itself in impenetrable walls of rhododendron and mountain laurel, and the hollows between the ridges fill with mist that seems to breathe with a life of its own. The locals have always known there was something wrong with Grim Hollow. The Cherokee who once lived in these mountains called this place the hunting grounds of the Shadow Walker, a name that should have served as warning enough. They avoided these woods whenever possible, and their stories spoke of something that had dwelt here since the beginning of time, something that was neither animal nor spirit, but something far worse, something that hungered for human flesh with an appetite that could never be satisfied. I first came to Grim Hollow in the spring of 1952. A young man fresh from 2 years of service in Korea, seeking peace in the wilderness after witnessing horrors I could not unsee. The head ranger at the time was a weathered old veteran named Jedediah Blackwood, a man who had spent 45 years in these woods and whose face told stories his mouth refused to speak. On my first day, Jedediah took me to the edge of a particularly dense hollow known locally as the Throat, a name that should have been my first warning. He pointed into the impenetrable darkness between the ancient trees and told me in a voice as rough as tree bark that there were places in Grim Hollow where a man should never venture alone, places where the forest kept what it claimed. I laughed nervously, dismissing his words as the superstitions of an old mountaineer who had spent too many decades in isolation. Jedediah did not laugh. He simply fixed me with those pale gray eyes that had witnessed too much, and told me that I would learn. "Everyone learns eventually," he said, "though some learn when it is far too late." The years passed, and I settled into the rhythm of life at Grim Hollow. I married a woman named Hester from the nearby town of Elk Ridge, a gentle soul with chestnut hair and eyes the color of autumn leaves. We had 3 children, 2 boys named Samuel and Benjamin, and a girl named Ruth, and for a time, life was good. I patrolled the trails, maintained the fire lookouts, assisted lost hikers, and gradually came to know every ridge and hollow, every stream and clearing within my assigned territory. But I also came to know the forest's darker nature. I learned which areas the animals fled from, where the birds fell silent for no discernible reason, where the compass needles would spin in wild circles as if confused by some unseen force. I learned to trust the instincts that warned me when something was wrong, when the woods themselves seemed to hold their breath in anticipation of something terrible. And I learned never to enter the Throat alone, never to stray from the marked trails after the sun began its descent, and never, ever to follow if I heard footsteps matching my own from somewhere deep within the trees. The autumn of 1983 began like any other. The leaves transformed into their brilliant shades of crimson and gold, painting the forest in colors so vivid they seemed almost painted by divine hands. Hikers came in greater numbers, eager to witness the spectacle before winter sealed the trails beneath ice and snow. Everything appeared normal, peaceful even, but I should have recognized the warning signs. The animals knew something was wrong long before any of us did. The deer that usually grazed near the ranger station vanished entirely, fleeing to lower elevations weeks earlier than their normal patterns. The birds grew silent, their morning songs replaced by an oppressive quiet that hung over the forest like a funeral shroud. And the dogs at the station, 4 German shepherds named Duke, Sergeant, Major, and Captain who had patrolled these woods fearlessly for years, began refusing to venture beyond the station perimeter, whimpering and cowering whenever we attempted to take them on patrol. The first disappearance occurred on October 7th. A hiker named Wilbur Hoskins, a retired mill worker from Knoxville, had set out alone on the Ridgecrest Trail, a moderate 6-mile loop that wound through some of the forest's most scenic overlooks. Wilbur was an experienced outdoorsman, a man who had tramped through wilderness far more challenging than anything Grim Hollow could offer. He had signed in at the trailhead at 7 in the morning, noting his expected return time as 1 in the afternoon. When he had not returned by nightfall, his wife Beulah called the station in a state of desperate panic. I organized a search party immediately, gathering every available ranger and volunteer from the surrounding communities. We combed the Ridgecrest Trail from end to end, calling Wilbur's name into the darkening woods, our flashlight beams cutting weak paths through the gathering darkness. We found nothing. No sign of Wilbur, no indication that anything had gone wrong. His footprints simply ended in the middle of the trail, approximately 3 miles from the trailhead, as if he had been lifted from the earth by some invisible force. The ground around the spot where his tracks vanished showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of animal attack, nothing that could explain how a grown man could simply cease to exist. I remember standing at that spot as the other searchers spread out through the surrounding forest, calling Wilbur's name with increasing desperation. The silence was absolute, so complete that it seemed to press against my eardrums like a physical weight. Then I felt it, a vibration in the ground beneath my feet, subtle at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. Heavy footsteps, impossibly heavy, approaching from somewhere deep in the forest. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, thicker and more oppressive than before. I raised my flashlight and pointed it toward the direction of the sound, but the beam illuminated nothing except trees and darkness. Yet I could feel something there, just beyond the reach of the light, watching me with what felt like ancient, hungry patience. One of the other rangers called my name, breaking the spell, and when I turned back toward the darkness, there was nothing but silence. We searched for Wilbur Hoskins for 5 days. We brought in tracking dogs from the county sheriff's department, helicopters with thermal imaging equipment, and nearly 300 volunteers who scoured every inch of the Ridgecrest Trail and the surrounding wilderness. We found nothing. No body, no clothing, no equipment, not a single trace of Wilbur Hoskins beyond those footprints that ended so abruptly in the middle of the trail. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead, victim of unknown circumstances. His wife Beulah never accepted that conclusion. She came to the station every week for months afterward, begging us to continue searching, insisting that her husband was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. I could never bring myself to tell her about the footsteps, about how they had shaken the very ground beneath my feet. Some truths are too terrible to share with those who are already suffering. The second disappearance occurred 9 days later, and this time there were witnesses. A group of 6 hikers from Charlotte, 3 married couples named Otis and Mabel Pritchard, Clyde and Edith Swinton, and Vernon and Prudence Lockhart, had set out on the Hollow Run Trail, a challenging 14-mile route that passed through some of the most isolated sections of Grim Hollow. They were experienced hikers, well-equipped and well-prepared, and they had planned to complete the loop over 2 days, camping overnight at a designated site near Whisperfall Cascade. According to the survivors, everything proceeded smoothly until they reached the falls. They established their camp, prepared dinner over a small fire, and settled in for the night as darkness consumed the forest around them. Otis Pritchard was the first to notice something was wrong. He later told me, his voice trembling and his eyes haunted by memories he desperately wished to forget, that he had been awakened sometime around 2 in the morning by a sound he could not identify. It was like nothing he had ever heard, he said, a deep rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground and the air and his very bones. He lay in his tent, paralyzed by a fear he could not rationalize, listening as heavy footsteps approached the camp. Then Clyde screamed. Otis scrambled from his tent to find chaos. The campfire had died to glowing embers, providing barely enough light to see anything, but what he glimpsed in that dim illumination would haunt him for the remainder of his days. Something massive had Clyde, something that Otis could not clearly perceive. It moved with terrible speed despite its enormous size, dragging Clyde into the forest as if the man weighed nothing at all, and the sounds Clyde produced, those desperate gurgling screams, were silenced with a wet, tearing noise that Otis refused to describe in detail. Mabel and Edith were screaming, and Vernon grabbed both women, pulling them toward the trail, abandoning their equipment in their desperate flight. Prudence stood frozen, staring into the darkness where Clyde had disappeared, and Otis had to physically drag her away before whatever had taken Clyde returned for the rest of them. They ran through the darkness for hours, stumbling over roots and rocks until they finally reached the ranger station just before dawn. Prudence collapsed on the station steps, her eyes wide and unfocused, muttering words that made no sense. She never recovered. The trauma of that night shattered something inside her, and she spent the rest of her life in a psychiatric facility, unable to speak of what she had witnessed without descending into uncontrollable screaming. I led the search party to Whisperfall Cascade that same morning, armed with rifles and accompanied by every ranger in the district. What we discovered at the campsite defied explanation. The tents had been torn apart. Not cut or opened, but shredded as if by tremendous claws. Equipment was scattered across the clearing, some of it crushed flat as if an enormous weight had pressed down upon it. And the blood, there was so much blood, splattered across the rocks and soaked into the earth, far more blood than a single human body could possibly contain. We followed the trail of blood into the forest, tracking it for nearly half a mile before it simply stopped. No body, no further evidence, just blood, and then nothing. Clyde Swinton was never found. Like Wilbur Hoskins before him, he had been swallowed by Grim Hollow and never returned. The official investigation brought in experts from the state police and the Federal Wildlife Service. They examined the evidence, collected samples of the blood, interviewed the survivors, and ultimately concluded that Clyde Swinton had been killed by a bear, probably a large black bear that had wandered into the campsite in search of food. The theory made no sense to anyone who had actually examined the campsite. Black bears do not drag their victims away with such speed and such silence. Black bears do not leave behind so much blood without also leaving behind a body, and black bears do not produce deep, rumbling growls that vibrate through the ground itself. But the experts needed an explanation, something that fit within their understanding of the natural world, and a bear attack was the only theory that came close. I knew better. I had seen the claw marks on the trees near the campsite, marks that were too high from the ground to have been made by any bear, marks that showed claws longer than my hand. I said nothing. Who would have believed me? The disappearances continued throughout October. A family of 5 from Ohio vanished from the Pinecrest Trail, leaving behind nothing but their abandoned vehicle in the parking area. A group of college students on a camping expedition went silent, their last radio transmission a garbled mess of screaming and static. A solitary photographer named Lemuel Webb, who had come to capture the autumn colors on film, walked into the forest one morning and never emerged. Each disappearance followed the same pattern: experienced outdoors people entering the forest and simply vanishing, leaving behind footprints that ended abruptly, equipment that showed signs of tremendous violence, and sometimes blood. So much blood, but never bodies. Never any bodies. I began spending more time in the forest, partly from duty and partly from a growing obsession to understand what was happening. I walked the trails at all hours, watching for patterns, searching for clues that the official investigators had missed. The other rangers thought I was losing my grip on sanity, and perhaps they were correct. Hester begged me to transfer to another station, to leave Grim Hollow behind before it claimed me as well. I could not explain to her why I had to stay, why I felt compelled to face whatever darkness had taken root in these woods. Perhaps it was guilt over the lives I had failed to save. Perhaps it was the need to prove that I was not afraid, that 31 years in Grim Hollow had not broken me as it had broken so many others. Or perhaps something in the forest was calling to me, drawing me deeper into its embrace with a siren song I could not resist. It was during one of these late-night patrols that I first saw it clearly. I was walking the section of the Ridgecrest Trail where Wilbur Hoskins had disappeared, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead of me, when I became aware of a presence watching me from the trees. The feeling was unmistakable. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you predator eyes are tracking your every movement. I stopped walking and slowly turned my flashlight toward the source of the feeling. At first, I saw nothing but the usual tangle of branches and shadows. Then the shadows moved. What I saw in that moment has haunted my dreams ever since. It stood between 2 massive hemlocks, easily 15 feet tall at the shoulder, its body covered in matted dark fur that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight beam. Its form was roughly bear-like, but wrong in every proportion, with limbs that were too long, too muscular, ending in paws the size of dinner plates tipped with claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. But it was the face that truly terrified me. A face that was almost ursine, but twisted into something far more intelligent, far more malevolent, with eyes that glowed with a dull amber light and a mouth filled with teeth that looked like they could shear through bone without effort. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, the creature and I, predator and prey, frozen in a tableau of mutual recognition. Then it opened that terrible mouth and produced a sound that I can only describe as a laugh, a deep, rumbling vocalization that vibrated through my chest and turned my bones to water. It was not the sound any natural animal could make. It was the sound of something ancient and evil, something that had been hunting these woods since before humanity existed, something that took pleasure in the fear of its prey. I ran. I am not ashamed to admit it. I turned and ran faster than I have ever run in my life, crashing through the underbrush without regard for the trail, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I fled. Behind me I could hear it following, those heavy footsteps shaking the ground with each stride, getting closer with every passing second. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, hot and fetid, smelling of rot and decay, and something else, something almost metallic, like old blood. I do not know how long I ran or how I found my way back to the station. My next clear memory is of Hester's face, pale with fear, as she found me collapsed on the front steps, my clothing torn, my hands bloody from pushing through thorny bushes, and my voice gone from screaming. I could not tell her what I had seen. The words would not come. I spent the following week in a state of shock, barely able to eat or sleep, jumping at every sound and perceiving monsters in every shadow. The other rangers covered my patrols, and Hester watched over me with growing concern, urging me to see a physician, to take leave, to get as far away from Grim Hollow as possible. I could not leave. I knew that now, knew it with a certainty that defied logic. The creature had seen me, had let me escape. Why? What did it want? Whatever was happening in Grim Hollow, I was part of it somehow, connected to it in ways I did not understand. I began researching, digging through old records and historical archives, searching for any mention of similar phenomena in the forest's past. What I discovered chilled me to the very marrow of my bones. Grim Hollow had a history of disappearances stretching back to the earliest days of European settlement in the region. In 1789, a group of 15 settlers attempting to establish a homestead in the area vanished without a trace. their cabins found empty with meals still sitting on the tables, as if the inhabitants had simply stood up and walked into the forest, never to return. In 1834, a logging camp of 43 men was abandoned overnight, the workers' belongings left behind, their tools still scattered around half-felled trees, but not a single body ever recovered. In 1912, a hunting party of 9 wealthy businessmen from Asheville entered Grim Hollow and disappeared, despite an extensive search that lasted 4 months. The pattern repeated every few decades, clusters of disappearances that defied explanation, followed by years of relative quiet. The Cherokee stories began to make a terrible kind of sense. There was something in Grim Hollow, something old and hungry, something that woke periodically to feed. I found references to the creature in several obscure texts, old journals and diaries from settlers and loggers who had encountered something in these woods and lived to tell about it. They called it by many names, the Shadow Walker, the Forest Devil, the Beast of the Hollows, but their descriptions were remarkably consistent. Massive and bear-like, with fur as dark as midnight, eyes that glowed with hellish light, claws that could tear through anything, and always that deep rumbling laugh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Some accounts suggested there was only one creature, an ancient thing that had lived in Grim Hollow since the mountains themselves were young. Others spoke of a family of creatures, a whole tribe of monsters that dwelt in the deepest, darkest hollows, emerging only when their hunger grew too great to ignore. I did not know which account was true, and I was not certain I wanted to find out. The disappearances continued into November. The Forest Service closed Grim Hollow to the public, citing safety concerns related to the ongoing investigation, but the closures did not stop the vanishings. A team of federal investigators sent to examine the evidence disappeared from their campsite near the throat, leaving behind overturned vehicles and splashes of blood but no bodies. A news crew from an Asheville television station, determined to get footage of the closed forest for a story about the mysterious disappearances, never returned from their expedition. Even animals began to vanish in greater numbers. Deer and elk found in pieces scattered across the forest floor, their remains showing signs of violence that no natural predator could have inflicted. The body count mounted, though we had no bodies to count, only absences, only silence where there should have been life. I knew I had to act. Whatever was happening in Grim Hollow, whatever ancient evil had awakened in these woods, I could not simply wait for it to claim more victims. I began planning an expedition into the heart of the forest, into the throat itself, the place Jedediah Blackwood had warned me about so many years ago. If there were answers to be found, they would be there, in that impenetrable darkness where even the forest seemed afraid to grow. I did not tell Hester what I was planning. She would have tried to stop me, and I could not bear to see the fear in her eyes. I wrote letters to my children, letters to be opened only if I did not return, explaining what I had seen and what I suspected, begging them to leave this place and never look back. Then, on the night of November 19th, I packed my gear and walked into the darkness. The throat was everything the old stories had warned about and more. The trees grew so close together that I could barely squeeze between them, their branches interlocking overhead in a canopy so thick that my flashlight seemed to provide the only light in existence. The air was heavy and still, filled with a silence so profound that my own breathing sounded impossibly loud. Creeping fog swallowed the lower portions of the trees, leaving only slow-moving shadows visible in the dim illumination. I could feel the wrongness of this place pressing against me from all sides, a sense of ancient malevolence that made every instinct scream at me to turn back. I kept walking. I do not know how long I traveled through that twisted forest, hours perhaps, or perhaps only minutes that stretched into eternity. Time seemed to move differently in the throat, flowing in strange patterns that defied measurement. Eventually I came to a clearing, though clearing is perhaps too generous a word for the space I found. It was more like a wound in the forest, a rough circle of bare earth where nothing grew, surrounded by trees that leaned away from the center as if repelled by some unseen force. In the middle of the clearing was a cave. The entrance yawned open like a mouth, easily 30 feet wide and 20 feet tall, descending into absolute darkness. The smell emanating from the cave was indescribable, a mixture of rot and musk and something else, something almost sulphurous, like brimstone from the depths of hell. I approached cautiously, my rifle raised, my flashlight beam playing across the entrance. What I saw made my stomach heave. There were bones scattered around the entrance, human bones, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, gnawed and cracked and sucked clean of marrow. I recognized some of the clothing fragments mixed among the bones. Wilbur Hoskins' distinctive red flannel jacket, the federal investigators' uniform patches, the news crew's equipment cases, crushed and torn but still bearing the station's logo, All of them here, all of them reduced to gnawed remnants at the entrance to this terrible place. I heard the footsteps before I saw the creature. Heavy, rhythmic, shaking the ground with each stride, emerging from the depths of the cave. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and saw it emerging into the dim light of the clearing. It was larger than I remembered, easily 18 feet tall now that I could see it fully, its massive frame covered in that light-absorbing dark fur. It moved on all fours, but with an unsettling fluidity that suggested it could rise to 2 legs whenever it chose. Its eyes fixed on me, glowing with that dull amber light, and it opened its mouth in that terrible laugh. "Roscoe Pemberton," it said, and the sound of my own name emerging from that nightmare mouth nearly stopped my heart. "I have been waiting for you." The voice was not what I expected. It was deep and resonant, vibrating through my bones, but it was also unmistakably intelligent, unmistakably aware. This was not simply a beast, not simply a predator following instinct. This was something that thought, something that planned, something that had been watching me specifically for reasons I could not fathom. I raised my rifle, though I knew it would be useless against something of this size and power. The creature laughed again. "Your weapons cannot harm me, little ranger," it said. "Nothing in your world can harm me. I am older than these mountains, older than the trees, older than your kind. I was hunting in these woods when your ancestors were still huddling in caves, and I will be hunting here long after your entire species has turned to dust." I asked it what it wanted, my voice barely a whisper. The creature's expression shifted, becoming something almost thoughtful. "I want what I have always wanted," it said. "To feed, to hunt, to feel the terror of my prey as I run them to exhaustion. Your kind provides such exquisite fear, such delicious desperation. I could feed on deer and elk forever, but they do not understand what is happening to them. They do not truly fear. But you humans, you know exactly what death means, and that knowledge makes your terror so much sweeter." I asked why it had let me escape before, why it had not simply killed me that night on the trail. The creature's laugh rumbled through the clearing. "Because you are special, Roscoe Pemberton," it said. "You are the watcher, the guardian of this forest. You have walked these woods for 30 years, learning their secrets, becoming part of them. When I feed on you, I will gain all that knowledge, all those memories. I will understand this place as you understand it. And through that understanding, I will become even more efficient, even more deadly. But I wanted you to know what was coming. I wanted you to feel the full weight of your fear before I claimed you. I understood then that I was going to die. There was no escape, no hope of survival against something so ancient and so powerful. But I refused to simply surrender, refused to give the creature the satisfaction of seeing me break. I raised my rifle and fired, emptying the magazine into its massive form. The bullet struck with wet, thudding sounds, but the creature barely seemed to notice. It shook itself, dislodging the flattened slugs from its hide, and advanced toward me with slow, deliberate steps. "You have spirit," it said, almost admiringly. "I will enjoy breaking it." What happened next is difficult to describe, partly because my memories of those moments are fragmented, and partly because words seem inadequate to capture the horror of what I experienced. The creature toyed with me, batting me around the clearing like a cat with a mouse, its claws slicing through my clothing and flesh with surgical precision. It could have killed me at any moment, but it chose to prolong my suffering, to drink in my fear like fine wine. I felt bones break, felt blood flowing from dozens of wounds, felt my consciousness beginning to slip away as shock and blood loss took their toll. And through it all, I could hear that terrible laugh, that rumbling vocalization that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I do not know what saved me. Perhaps the creature simply grew bored with its game. Perhaps something distracted it, some other prey that caught its attention. Perhaps, in some way I cannot understand, Grim Hollow itself intervened, protecting the ranger who had served it faithfully for so many years. Whatever the reason, I woke up sometime later, alone in the clearing, the creature gone and the cave entrance sealed as if it had never existed. I was broken and bleeding, barely able to move, but I was alive. I crawled through the forest for what felt like days, leaving a trail of blood behind me, until I finally emerged onto a familiar trail and collapsed. The other rangers found me the next morning, more dead than alive. They rushed me to the hospital in Asheville, where I spent 3 months recovering from my injuries. The official report attributed my wounds to a bear attack, though no bear could have inflicted the precise, almost surgical cuts that covered my body. I did not argue with the report. Who would have believed the truth? I returned to Grim Hollow after my recovery, though many thought I was insane to do so. Hester had left by then, taking the children to live with her sister in Tennessee, unable to bear the weight of my obsession any longer. I do not blame her. I had become something other than the man she married, consumed by a darkness that I could not escape. I continued my work as a ranger, patrolling the trails and maintaining the station, but I also began documenting everything I had learned, compiling a record of the creature and its history that I hoped would survive long after I was gone. The creature did not return for me. In the years that followed, the disappearances slowed, then stopped entirely, as if my confrontation had somehow sated its hunger or driven it back into hibernation. But I knew it was still there, waiting in the depths of the throat, patient and eternal. I could feel its presence sometimes, late at night when the forest fell silent, a weight at the edge of my consciousness that reminded me of what lurked in the darkness. It was waiting for me, waiting for the day when I would become weak enough to claim. And I knew that day would eventually come. I am writing this account in the final months of my life. The doctors say the cancer has spread too far for treatment, a consequence of too many years of stress and too little care for my own health. I have made my peace with what is coming. In a strange way, I am almost looking forward to it. The creature promised to claim me, to add my knowledge and memories to its collection, and perhaps that is a form of immortality, a way of living on even after my body fails. Or perhaps it is simply damnation, an eternity trapped within that ancient evil consciousness. Either way, I will finally have my answers. Before I go, I wanted to leave this record, this warning to those who might someday find themselves in Grim Hollow or places like it. The creature is real. It has always been real, lurking in the wild places of the world, waiting for those foolish or unlucky enough to wander into its domain. Most people will never encounter it, will live their entire lives without knowing how close they came to the edge of oblivion, but some will. Some will hear those heavy footsteps shaking the ground, will feel those hungry eyes watching from the shadows, will find themselves facing a horror beyond imagination. To those people, I offer what little wisdom I have gained. Do not go into the forest alone. Do not stray from the marked trails. Do not enter the throat under any circumstances. And if you hear something laughing in the darkness, if you feel the ground shaking beneath impossibly heavy footsteps, run. Run and do not look back. The creature is ancient and patient and hungry, and it will not be denied its prey. But you can delay the inevitable, can buy yourself time to escape if you do not freeze, if you do not surrender to the terror. Fight. Always fight. Even when hope seems lost. Even when death seems certain, fight with everything you have. That is the only advice I can give. My name is Roscoe Pemberton. I was a ranger at Grim Hollow National Forest for 31 years. I saw things in those woods that still haunt my dreams. And now, as I face my final days, I pass this knowledge on to you, whoever you are, wherever you might be. Be careful, be vigilant, and never ever forget that the forest is watching, always watching, with hungry eyes and infinite patience. The beast of Grim Hollow is waiting. It has always been waiting, and it will always be waiting. The night my story truly ended began much as the night my story truly began, with the forest falling into an unnatural silence and something forcing it to stop breathing. I was alone in my cabin near the ranger station, the machines monitoring my failing body humming softly in the darkness. The cancer had done its work, and I knew I had only days, perhaps hours, remaining. I had said my goodbyes to my children, who had forgiven me enough to visit in my final weeks, and I was ready to face whatever came next. But as I lay there, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, I became aware of a presence outside my window. Heavy footsteps, shaking the ground with each stride, the familiar rumbling growl that vibrated through my bones. I opened my eyes to find 2 points of amber light glowing in the darkness beyond the glass. The creature had come for me at last. It did not enter the cabin. It simply waited outside, watching me through the window with those terrible, intelligent eyes. I could feel its hunger, its anticipation, its ancient patience finally reaching its end. I am here, Roscoe Pemberton. Its voice rumbled through the walls. The time has come. I asked if it had come to devour me, to add my consciousness to its collection as it had promised so many years ago. The creature's laugh shook the cabin's foundation. Yes, it said, but also to honor you. You are the only human who has ever seen me truly, who has ever understood what I am. That earns you a certain respect. You will not suffer as the others suffered. I will make your end quick, and your memories will live on within me for eternity. I should have been afraid. I should have been terrified, knowing that the end I had dreaded for so many years was finally upon me. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had lived a good life, had served the forest faithfully despite its horrors, had left behind children and grandchildren who would carry my memory forward. The creature would claim my body, perhaps my consciousness, but it could not claim the love I had given and received, the moments of joy and beauty that had made my life worth living. Those things were beyond its reach, beyond its understanding. I rose from my bed slowly and painfully and walked to the door. I opened it and stepped out onto the porch, facing the massive creature that had haunted my nightmares for so long. It towered above me, blocking out the stars with its enormous form, its breath hot and fetid against my face. "I am ready," I said, and I meant it. The creature studied me for a long moment, its expression unreadable. "You do not fear me," it said, almost questioningly. I told it that I had spent too many years being afraid, that fear had cost me my marriage, my family, my peace of mind. I was done with fear. Whatever came next, I would face it with what dignity I had left. The creature was silent for a long time. Then it did something I never expected. It laughed. Not the terrible, mocking laugh I had heard before, but something different, something almost respectful. "You are unique, Roscoe Pemberton," it said. "In all my centuries of hunting, I have never encountered a human like you. Most beg for mercy, or flee in blind panic, or break down entirely when faced with their end. But you stand before me, broken and dying, and meet my gaze without flinching. That is worthy of admiration." I asked what that admiration was worth if it would stay my execution. The creature shook its massive head. "No," it said. "I am what I am, and hunger is my nature. I cannot spare you any more than a wolf can spare the deer it hunts. But I can offer you something else. Something I have never offered to any of my prey. Understanding." The creature touched my forehead with one of its massive claws, and suddenly I was somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the cabin and the forest and my failing body. I was inside the creature's mind, experiencing its memories as if they were my own. I saw the world as it had been millions of years ago, when the mountains were young and the forests stretched unbroken from horizon to horizon. I saw the creature hunting, feeding, growing, becoming the apex predator of a world that had not yet dreamed of humanity. I saw the first humans arrive, with their stone tools and their fire, and I felt the creature's initial confusion, then interest, then hunger as it discovered that these new creatures provided a kind of sustenance no other prey could offer. I saw centuries of hunting, of feeding, of waiting in the darkness for the next unwary traveler, and I understood, finally, what the creature truly was. It was not evil, not in the way humans understood the word. It was simply ancient, operating according to drives and instincts that predated human morality by millions of years. It hunted because hunting was its purpose, fed because feeding sustained it, and took pleasure in the fear of its prey because that pleasure had evolved to make it a more efficient predator. It was no more evil than a tornado or an earthquake, a force of nature that could not be reasoned with or appealed to. And yet, within that ancient consciousness, there was something almost like loneliness, a recognition that it was the last of its kind, the sole survivor of a species that had once dominated these mountains. It had no mate, no offspring, no companions of any kind. It had only its hunger and its prey, an existence that stretched back millions of years and would stretch forward for millions more, unchanging and alone. I returned to my body, to the porch and the creature and the cold night air. Tears were streaming down my face, though I could not have said whether they were tears of fear or sadness or something else entirely. "Now you understand," the creature said. "Now you know what I am." I told it that I pitied it, that existence seemed like a form of hell, endless and empty and alone. The creature's expression shifted, becoming something I had never seen on its features before, something almost like surprise. "Pity," it repeated, as if tasting the word. "I have not experienced pity in a very long time. Your kind usually offers only fear and hatred." It paused, considering. "Perhaps that is why you intrigue me so, Roscoe Pemberton. You see me clearly, and yet you do not hate." I asked if understanding changed anything, if the knowledge it had shared with me would spare my life. The creature shook its head slowly. "No," it said again. "I cannot change my nature any more than you can change yours. But I can give you a choice, something I have never offered to any prey. You can come with me willingly. Walk into the darkness by my side, and I will end your pain quickly and cleanly. Or you can flee, and I will hunt you as I have hunted all the others, and your terror will be exquisite. The outcome will be the same, but the journey will be very different. Choose. I considered the options. Part of me wanted to run, to fight, to rage against the dying of the light, as I had advised others to do. But I was old and broken and tired, and the cancer was claiming me regardless of what the creature did. At least this way, I would have some control over my end. At least this way, I would die in the forest I had loved and served for so long, not in some sterile hospital room surrounded by beeping machines. I will come with you, I said. The creature nodded, something almost like approval in its glowing eyes. Then come, Roscoe Pemberton. Let us walk into the darkness together. I do not know what happened after that. My memories end on that porch, facing the creature that had haunted my life for so long, making peace with my fate. Perhaps the creature kept its promise and made my end quick and painless. Perhaps my consciousness now resides somewhere within its ancient mind, watching through its eyes as it continues its eternal hunt. Or perhaps I simply died of the cancer that was already killing me, and the creature was nothing more than a hallucination, a final gift from a brain struggling to make sense of its own dissolution. This account was found in Roscoe Pemberton's cabin following his death in the winter of 1995. His body was never recovered. A search of the surrounding forest found no trace of him, only large, unidentified footprints in the snow outside his cabin that led toward the throat, and then vanished as if whatever made them had simply ceased to exist. The official report listed him as a victim of exposure, having wandered into the forest in a state of confusion brought on by his illness. His family chose to accept this explanation, finding it easier to believe than the alternative. Whether the events described in this account are true, the product of a dying mind, or something in between, we leave to the reader to decide. But if you ever find yourself in Grim Hollow National Forest, if you ever feel the forest fall into an unnatural silence and sense something watching you from the darkness between the trees, remember Roscoe Pemberton. Remember his warnings. And remember that in the eternal struggle between humanity and the darkness, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is face our fate with dignity and grace. The forest remains, as it has always remained. The trees grow tall and thick, their branches reaching toward a sky they will never touch. The trails wind through the wilderness, inviting hikers and campers to explore their beauty. And somewhere in the depths of the throat, in that place where even the light fears to go, something waits. It is patient, as it has always been patient. It knows that someday, someone else will wander into its domain, will hear its heavy footsteps shaking the ground, will become the next meal in its eternal feast. It does not mind the waiting. It has all the time in the world. Some nights, when the moon is dark and the wind is still, the rangers at Grim Hollow report hearing strange sounds from deep within the forest. Heavy footsteps that shake the ground, deep, rumbling growls that vibrate through the air. And sometimes, late at night, they hear what sounds almost like laughter, ancient and terrible and utterly inhuman. They dismiss it as the natural noises of the wilderness, the settling of rocks, the movements of bears in the underbrush. They do not know about Roscoe Pemberton, about the creature he faced and the darkness he embraced. They do not know that the forest remembers, always remembers, and that it is only a matter of time before the next chapter of this terrible story begins. Perhaps you will be the one to write it. Perhaps you will be the next to hear those footsteps, to feel those hungry eyes watching your every move, to face the choice that Roscoe Pemberton faced so many years ago. If that day comes, remember his words, remember his warnings, and remember that no matter how dark the night may seem, there is always a choice to be made, a decision about how we will face our end. The creature cannot take that from us. It cannot take the dignity of choice, the courage of acceptance, the peace of understanding. Those things are ours, and ours alone. This is the story of the beast of Grim Hollow National Forest. This is the story of Roscoe Pemberton and the ancient hunger that haunted his life and claimed his death. It is not a story with a happy ending, because some stories do not have happy endings. But it is a story that needed to be told, a warning that needed to be given, a truth that needed to be spoken, even if no one believes it. The forest is waiting. The creature is watching, and somewhere in the darkness of the throat, the heavy footsteps continue to fall. Roscoe Pemberton, the creature whispers. Roscoe Pemberton, we remember you, and it always will. The reports kept coming in the months and years after Roscoe's disappearance. Hikers who claimed to have seen something massive moving through the trees at dusk, something that walked on 4 legs but seemed capable of standing on 2. Campers who woke in the night to find enormous footprints circling their tents, prints that showed claws longer than any bear could possess. Rangers who heard deep rumbling growls from parts of the forest where nothing should have been. Each incident was explained away, attributed to overactive imaginations, tricks of the light, the natural eeriness of an ancient forest. But those who experienced these things knew the truth, felt it in their bones in the same way Roscoe Pemberton had felt it. Something was hunting them from the darkness. Something was waiting. A young ranger named Thaddeus Whitfield joined the Grim Hollow staff in the summer of 1998. He was fresh from forestry school, eager and idealistic, much as Roscoe had been when he first arrived more than 40 years earlier. The older rangers took him under their wing, teaching him the trails and the procedures, showing him how to survive in the wilderness. But there was one thing they did not teach him, one subject that was never discussed around the campfires or during the long night shifts. They did not tell him about Roscoe Pemberton. They did not tell him about the creature. They did not tell him about the disappearances that had plagued Grim Hollow for centuries, the bodies that were never found, the screams that echoed through the darkness and then fell silent forever. Perhaps they thought they were protecting him. Perhaps they simply did not want to admit even to themselves that the stories might be true. Thaddeus found Roscoe's account by accident, stumbling across a copy in the storage room of the ranger station where old records were kept. He read it in a single sitting, his coffee growing cold beside him, his hands trembling as he turned the pages. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window at the forest that surrounded the station on all sides. The trees seemed darker now, more threatening, their branches reaching toward him like grasping claws. He knew, in that moment, that his life had changed forever. He could not unread what he had read, could not unsee the images that Roscoe's words had planted in his mind. The forest was no longer simply a place of beauty and peace. It was a hunting ground, and he was prey. Thaddeus became consumed with the creature, spending every free moment researching the history of Grim Hollow, interviewing old-timers who remembered the disappearances of 1983, searching for any evidence that might prove or disprove Roscoe's claims. What he found only deepened his conviction that the old ranger had been telling the truth. The patterns were too consistent, too precise to be coincidence. Every few decades, clusters of disappearances, always in the remote sections of the forest, always without bodies or conclusive explanations, and always the reports of strange sounds and massive shapes that preceded and followed the events. Thaddeus brought his findings to the station chief, a practical man named Horace Brennan who had run Grim Hollow for 20 years. Horace listened patiently as Thaddeus laid out his evidence, nodded at appropriate moments, and when he finished, told him in a tone that brooked no argument to forget everything he had read. Roscoe Pemberton was a troubled man, he said. His account was the product of trauma and mental illness, nothing more. The disappearances had natural explanations, even if those explanations were never found. And the creature, the beast or shadow walker or whatever name the old stories gave it, did not exist. It was a fairy tale, a ghost story told to frightened children and gullible tourists. Thaddeus wanted to argue, wanted to show Horace the evidence that was right there in front of him, if only he would open his eyes. But he saw the fear behind Horace's certainty, the desperate need to believe that the world was rational and safe. He said nothing more. Some truths are too terrible to force on those who are not ready to receive them. The summer of 1998 was unusually quiet at Grim Hollow. The trails were crowded with visitors, the campgrounds full, the station busy with the 1,000 small tasks that kept a national forest running. Thaddeus threw himself into his work, trying to push the creature from his mind, trying to convince himself that Horace was right and Roscoe's account was nothing but the ramblings of a broken man. He almost succeeded. Almost. Then came the night of September 12th, and everything changed. It began with a report from a group of campers near Whisperfall Cascade, the same site where Clyde Swinton had been taken more than 15 years before. They claimed to have heard heavy footsteps in the night, footsteps that shook the ground beneath their tents. They claimed to have heard a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They packed up their camp before dawn and fled to the ranger station, their faces pale and their hands shaking. Thaddeus took their statements while Horace dismissed their claims as the result of too much whiskey and too many ghost stories. But Thaddeus saw the terror in their eyes, recognized it as the same terror Roscoe had described in his account. These people had heard something in the forest, something that should not exist, and whatever it was waking up. More reports came in over the following weeks. A solo hiker on the Ridgecrest Trail who swore something massive had followed him for miles, shaking the ground with each step but never coming close enough to see. A family who found enormous claw marks on the trees around their campsite, marks that were far too high to have been made by any bear. A photographer who captured an image that showed what looked like two glowing eyes in the darkness between the trees, eyes that were level with the top of a pickup truck. The image was blurry, inconclusive, but Thaddeus studied it for hours, comparing it to the descriptions in Roscoe's account. The resemblance was unmistakable. The creature was awake, and it was hunting. Thaddeus knew he had to act. He could not sit by and wait for the next disappearance, could not pretend that everything was normal while people were in danger. He began spending his off-duty hours in the forest, walking the remote trails, watching for signs of the creature's presence. He carried Roscoe's journal with him, along with a high-powered rifle and a satellite phone that would allow him to call for help if he encountered the beast. If the creature could be documented, photographed, perhaps even captured, then the authorities would have no choice but to acknowledge its existence. Then the forest could be properly closed, properly protected, and no more innocent people would have to die. On the night of October 3rd, Thaddeus entered the throat. The forest closed around him like a living thing, branches reaching for his clothes, roots rising to trip his feet, fog swallowing everything in its pale embrace. He moved slowly, carefully, his flashlight beam cutting a weak path through the darkness. The air grew colder as he penetrated deeper into the forest, his breath forming clouds of mist that hung in the still air like ghosts. He could feel something watching him, could sense a presence surrounding him on all sides. The creature was there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting to see what this foolish young ranger would do. Thaddeus found the clearing where Roscoe had faced the creature all those years ago. The cave entrance was visible again, a black wound in the face of a cliff that seemed to absorb all light. The bones were still there, scattered around the entrance, though weather and time had bleached them white and scattered them across a wider area. Thaddeus photographed everything, documenting the evidence that would prove Roscoe's account was true. He was so focused on his task that he did not hear the footsteps until they were almost upon him. The creature emerged from the cave like a nightmare given form. It was everything Roscoe had described and more. A massive beast of matted dark fur and glowing amber eyes, its claws gleaming in the weak light of Thaddeus's flashlight. It studied him with an intelligence that seemed impossible for any animal, its enormous head tilted slightly to one side as if curious about this new intruder. Another one, it rumbled, its voice vibrating through Thaddeus's bones. Another watcher, come to my domain. You read the old one's words, did you not? You know what I am. Thaddeus raised his rifle with shaking hands. The creature laughed, that terrible sound that Roscoe had described, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Your weapon cannot harm me, it said. The old one tried the same thing many years ago. Do you think you will succeed where he failed? Thaddeus did not answer. Instead, he pulled the trigger. The rifle roared, the bullet striking the creature square in the chest. The beast stumbled, surprised, and looked down at the wound. Thaddeus fired again and again, emptying the magazine into the creature's massive form. Each bullet struck home, each one drawing dark blood that steamed in the cold air. The creature fell to one knee, its eyes wide with something that might have been disbelief. You hurt me, it said, its voice weakening. How is this possible? Thaddeus reloaded and kept firing. He did not know why his bullets were working when Roscoe's had failed. Perhaps the creature had grown weaker over the years. Perhaps the high-powered rounds he was using could penetrate hide that normal bullets could not. Perhaps it was simply luck, or fate, or some force beyond human understanding. Whatever the reason, the creature was falling, its ancient body finally succumbing to wounds it had not experienced in millennia. The beast collapsed onto its side, its breathing shallow and labored. Thaddeus approached cautiously, his rifle still trained on its massive head. The creature's eyes found his, and in their amber depths, Thaddeus saw something he had not expected. Relief. So, it is over, the creature whispered, its voice barely audible. After all these ages, it is finally over. I thought I would live forever. Thought I would hunt forever. But everything ends, eventually. Even me. Thaddeus asked if it had any last words, if there was anything it wanted to say before it passed. The creature's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. Tell them I was here, it said. Tell them I hunted these woods for millions of years, that I was the greatest predator this world has ever known. Tell them I was real. The creature's eyes dimmed, the amber light fading to darkness, and then it was still. Thaddeus stood over its body for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. He had killed it. After all these years, after all the deaths and disappearances and terror, he had killed the beast of Grimhollow. The nightmare was over, or so he thought. The body began to dissolve almost immediately, breaking apart into a fine black dust that was carried away by a wind that seemed to come from nowhere. Within minutes, there was nothing left of the creature but a dark stain on the forest floor. Thaddeus photographed everything, but when he reviewed the images later, they showed nothing but darkness. The camera had not captured the creature, had not recorded its death. It was as if the beast had never existed at all. Thaddeus returned to the ranger station and told Horace what had happened. Horace listened with growing disbelief, then growing anger, and finally told Thaddeus that he was either a liar or insane. There was no creature. There had never been a creature. The disappearances were the result of natural causes, nothing more. Thaddeus was suspended pending a psychological evaluation, and when the evaluation came back inconclusive, he was quietly transferred to another forest, far away from Grimhollow and its dark secrets. The years passed. The disappearances stopped entirely, as if Thaddeus had truly killed whatever had been hunting in those woods. The Forest Service reopened the trails, welcomed visitors back, and gradually forgot the horrors that had once plagued the area. Grimhollow became just another national forest, beautiful and peaceful, with no hint of the darkness that had once dwelt in its depths. But Thaddeus never forgot. He kept Roscoe's journal, kept his own notes from that night in the throat, kept the memory of the creature's last words alive in his mind. Tell them I was here. Tell them I was real. He knew that someday, someone would need to know the truth. Someday, the creature might return, or another of its kind might emerge from some other ancient forest. And when that day came, there needed to be a record, a warning, a guide for those who would face the darkness. Thaddeus is an old man now, retired from the Forest Service and living in a small cabin in the mountains of Vermont. He has never returned to Grimhollow, never walked those trails or looked into that darkness again. But sometimes, late at night, he dreams of amber eyes and heavy footsteps and a voice that vibrates through his bones, and he wonders if the creature truly died that night, or if it simply retreated, waiting for another century to pass before it emerged to hunt again. This account was compiled from the journals and notes of Thaddeus Whitfield and Roscoe Pemberton, combined and edited for clarity. Whether the events described within are true, the product of disturbed minds, or something in between, we leave to the reader to decide. But if you ever find yourself in Grimhollow National Forest, if you ever feel the forest fall into an unnatural silence and hear heavy footsteps shaking the ground, remember these words. The creature may be dead, or it may simply be sleeping. The darkness may be banished, or it may simply be waiting. And the forest is always watching, always remembering, always hungry for those foolish enough to wander into its depths. Be careful out there. Be vigilant. And never, ever forget that some monsters are real. The forest remains. The trails wind through the wilderness, inviting visitors to explore their beauty. The fog creeps through the hollows, swallowing trees and leaving only shadows. And somewhere, in the deepest parts of Grimhollow, something stirs in its ancient sleep, dreaming of the hunt, dreaming of the fear, dreaming of the day when it will wake again. The beast of Grimhollow may be dead, or it may simply be waiting. Only time will tell. There's a rule about not anthropomorphizing wildlife in official reports. After what watched us from the tree line, that rule feels dangerously outdated. My name is Samuel Brooks, and I've been a ranger in the Black Forest for 12 years. I'm writing this from a hospital bed in Portland, my left arm in a cast, 3 ribs cracked, and enough stitches across my torso to map a small constellation. The doctors say I'm lucky to be alive. They don't know the half of it. William Carter and Frank Dawson weren't so fortunate. Their bodies are still out there, somewhere in those ancient woods, and I know we'll never find them. Not after what took them, not after what I saw. The Black Forest spans 400,000 acres across the northern Cascades, a wilderness so dense and remote that some sections have never been properly mapped. Old growth trees that were saplings when Rome fell, valleys that haven't seen sunlight in centuries, ridges that scrape the belly of the clouds. It's beautiful in the way a hurricane is beautiful, magnificent, and terrible, and utterly indifferent to human life. I've pulled 17 bodies from those woods over my career. Hikers who underestimated the terrain, hunters who got turned around, climbers who trusted the wrong handhold. Nature doesn't care about your experience or your equipment or your confidence. It just is. And you either respect it or it kills you. But what happened last week wasn't nature, not the nature we understand anyway. It started with a routine patrol, checking the northern trails before the winter storms hit. October in the Black Forest means preparation, making sure the emergency shelters are stocked, the trail markers are visible, the bridges haven't washed out. 3-man team, 5-day circuit, standard procedure. I'd done it dozens of times. William Carter was our newest ranger, only 2 years on the job, but sharp, observant, the kind of guy who noticed things others missed. Frank Dawson was a 20-year veteran, built like a linebacker, could track a deer through a rainstorm. Good men, both of them, professionals. We started from the Cascade River trailhead at dawn on October 15th, heavy packs loaded with supplies and emergency gear. The weather was perfect, clear sky, temperature in the 50s, the kind of day that reminds you why you became a ranger. The first 10 miles were easy, well-maintained trail following the river valley. We made good time, joking about Carter's new girlfriend, Dawson's upcoming retirement, my daughter's acceptance to college. Normal conversation, the kind you have when everything feels safe and predictable. The first sign something was wrong came at mile marker 12. We'd stopped for lunch at Thornton Creek, a popular camping spot during summer, but deserted this late in the season. Dawson was filtering water when he called us over. There in the soft mud by the creek were footprints, but not any footprints I'd seen before. They were enormous, easily 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes and what looked like claw marks at the tips. The stride length between prints was over 6 feet. Whatever made them wasn't walking, it was practically gliding across the ground. Carter knelt down with his camera, documenting everything. The prints were fresh, maybe 6 hours old based on the water seepage. Dawson tried to play it off as a hoax, someone with fake feet trying to start another Bigfoot story, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. These prints were too deep, too perfectly formed. A hoax would show signs of artificial weight distribution, inconsistent depth, visible edges where the fake foot met the ground. These were real. Something massive had walked through here this morning. We followed the tracks for about 100 yards before they disappeared into the underbrush. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. The forest was holding its breath. In 12 years, I'd never experienced anything like it. Even predators don't create that kind of absolute stillness. This was different. This was wrong. Dawson felt it too. He unslung his rifle, a Remington 700 we carried for emergency situations. Bears mostly, though we'd never had to use them. Carter was still examining the tracks, oblivious to the atmosphere change. Youth and inexperience, I thought. He'd learn to read the forest's moods eventually, if he survived long enough. We continued north, following the trail as it climbed toward Cascade Pass. The silence followed us, a bubble of dead air that moved with our steps. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched, that primitive awareness that something was tracking us. I kept checking our 6, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Just shadows and bark and the endless columns of Douglas firs. Around 3 in the afternoon, we reached the Devil's Staircase, a series of steep switchbacks that climbed 800 feet in less than a mile. Halfway up, Carter stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into him. He was pointing at a tree, a massive cedar probably 400 years old. The bark was torn, long parallel gouges running from about 9 feet up down to chest height. 4 marks, evenly spaced, cutting deep into the wood. Fresh sap was still weeping from the wounds. Dawson examined the marks, running his fingers along the gouges. No tool made those cuts. They were too rough, too organic. Claws, massive claws, had raked this tree recently. But what kind of animal could reach 9 feet up? What kind of animal had claws that could tear through cedar bark like paper? We found more marked trees as we climbed, dozens of them, some old, scarred over with years of growth. Others fresh, the white wood still exposed. Territory markers, Dawson said. Something was claiming this area, warning others to stay away. But warning what others? What could possibly threaten something large enough to make those marks? We made camp at Cascade Pass, a flat area with good visibility in all directions. Standard procedure when something feels off: circle the wagons, establish a defensive position. We set up our tents in a triangle, built a large fire in the center, established watch rotations. I took first watch, 8 to midnight. Dawson would take midnight to 4. Carter got the dawn shift, 4 to 8. The sun set around 6:30, and darkness fell like a heavy curtain. Out here, miles from any artificial light, night is absolute. Your fire becomes your world, a small circle of warmth and visibility surrounded by an ocean of black. I sat with my rifle across my lap, feeding branches into the flames, trying to ignore the feeling that something was circling our camp just beyond the light. At 9:15, I heard the first call. It started low, almost below hearing, a rumble that you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. Then it rose, becoming a sound I can only describe as a roar mixed with a scream, primal and intelligent at the same time. It came from the north, maybe 200 yards out. Another call answered from the east, then the south. We were surrounded. I woke Dawson and Carter. We stood back to back, weapons ready, scanning the darkness. The calls continued, moving closer, coordinating. These weren't random animal sounds. This was communication, planning, strategy. Whatever was out there was smart enough to work together. Carter was shaking, his flashlight beam sweeping wildly across the trees. Dawson looked grim but steady, the kind of calm that comes from experience. I tried to project confidence I didn't feel. As the senior ranger, these men were looking to me for leadership, for answers I didn't have. At 10:30, we saw the first eyes. Two glowing amber orbs reflecting our flashlight beams from about 50 yards out. They were high, at least 8 feet off the ground. They blinked once, slowly, then disappeared. More eyes appeared to our left, then right. I counted at least 4 pairs, possibly more. They were testing us, seeing how we'd react. I fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed through the pass, sharp and sudden. The eyes vanished. For a moment, I thought we'd scared them off. Then the roar came, so loud and close it seemed to shake the ground. Not scared, angry. A tree branch sailed out of the darkness, thick as my arm and heavy enough to kill if it had connected. It crashed into our fire, sending sparks everywhere. Another branch followed, then another. We were being bombarded, forced to dodge and duck as wood missiles flew from the darkness. They were trying to destroy our fire, take away our light. Dawson and I fired into the trees, not aiming at anything specific, just trying to establish a threat. Carter had dropped his rifle and was curled behind a log, paralyzed with fear. I couldn't blame him. Nothing in training prepares you for this. No manual covers what to do when something intelligent and hostile has you surrounded in absolute darkness. The bombardment stopped as suddenly as it started. Silence crashed down, broken only by our ragged breathing and the crackling of our scattered fire. I quickly rebuilt the flames while Dawson stood guard. Carter remained behind his log, muttering what sounded like prayers. We made it through the night. Somehow. The eyes returned periodically, watching us, studying us. Sometimes we'd hear movement, heavy footsteps circling our camp. Once, something brushed against Carter's tent, leaving a smell like wet dog mixed with rotting meat. But they didn't attack. Not yet. They were waiting for something. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through the trees. We were exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear. In the daylight, we could see the damage around our camp. Branches everywhere, some as thick as telephone poles. Footprints, hundreds of them, circling our position. And on the trees at the edge of our camp, fresh marks, those same 4-claw gouges, head height. A message, a warning. We were in their territory. We packed quickly, no one speaking. The plan was simple. Get out. Forget the patrol, forget protocol, just get back to civilization as fast as possible. But as we started down the trail, we found it blocked. Trees, massive firs that had stood for centuries, had been pushed over during the night. Not cut, not burned, pushed. The root balls were torn from the earth, trunks laid across the trail like a barricade. It would take us hours to climb over or around them. We tried the eastern trail, blocked. The western route, also blocked. They had trapped us during the night, systematically closing every exit. We were being corralled, herded like sheep. The intelligence behind it was terrifying. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was a plan. Carter started to panic, hyperventilating, talking about calling for helicopter evacuation. I tried the satellite phone. Dead. Not broken, not out of battery, just dead. No signal, no static, nothing. The emergency beacon, our last resort device that was supposed to work anywhere, anytime, was also dead. We were completely cut off. Dawson took charge, his military background kicking in. We needed to find another way out, maybe follow the creek down the mountain, stay off the established trails. It would be dangerous, steep terrain, lots of exposure, but better than waiting here for whatever came next. We started bushwhacking through the undergrowth, moving as quietly as possible. We made it maybe half a mile before we heard Carter scream. I spun around to find him being dragged backward by something I couldn't quite see, a dark shape that moved too fast to track. Dawson and I fired simultaneously, our shots thundering through the forest. The shape dropped Carter and vanished into the trees. We ran to him. His jacket was torn, 4 parallel gashes across the back, blood seeping through. But he was alive, conscious, terrified, but alive. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It stood between 2 massive firs about 30 yards away, partially hidden but visible enough. 9 feet tall at least, maybe more, covered in dark brown hair, matted and thick. Massive shoulders, arms that hung past its knees. The face was almost human but wrong. Too wide, too flat, with deep-set eyes that glowed amber even in daylight. It stared at us with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. This wasn't an animal. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist. It tilted its head, studying us the way a scientist might study lab rats. Then it made a sound, not a roar or scream, but something like speech, guttural and deep. Other voices answered from the forest around us. They were communicating, coordinating. The attack on Carter had been a test. Now they knew we would fight back, but that our weapons weren't particularly effective. We kept moving, Carter leaning on Dawson, me taking point. The creatures paced us. I could hear them in the trees, occasionally catching glimpses of dark shapes moving parallel to our path. They were hurting us again, but toward what? Around noon, we reached a small valley we didn't recognize. It wasn't on our maps, which should have been impossible. We knew every valley, every ridge, every creek in this section of the Black Forest. But here was something new, hidden, secret. The trees here were different, older, larger, some of them 40 feet in circumference. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of moss that muffled our footsteps, and scattered throughout the valley were structures. Not buildings exactly, but deliberate constructions. Branches woven together to form shelters, stones stacked in patterns that suggested meaning, what looked like carved totems, crude but undeniably intentional. We had stumbled into their home, their village for lack of a better word, and we were not alone. They emerged from the structures, from behind trees, from shadows I hadn't even noticed. Dozens of them, different sizes, different colors of fur, but all massive, all watching us with those intelligent eyes. Males, females, juveniles that were still taller than a man, an entire community of things that shouldn't exist. Carter fainted, just dropped, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Dawson stood firm, but I could see his hands shaking. I felt disconnected from my body, like I was watching everything from a great distance. This couldn't be real. But the smell, that overwhelming stench of wild animal and decay, that was real. The way the ground shook slightly when the largest one moved, that was real. The biggest one, a male with graying fur who must have been 10 feet tall, approached us, not aggressively, but with purpose. It stopped about 10 feet away and spoke, not in English, not in any language I recognized, but it was definitely speech, complex sounds with rhythm and structure. It gestured at our weapons, then at the ground. The message was clear: put them down. I looked at Dawson. He shook his head slightly. The weapons were the only things keeping us alive. But were they? These creatures had had multiple opportunities to kill us. They'd chosen not to. Maybe, just maybe, if we showed we weren't a threat, they'd let us go. I slowly placed my rifle on the ground. After a long moment, Dawson did the same. The large male made another sound, and 2 younger ones came forward. They picked up our rifles, examined them with obvious curiosity, turning them over, looking down the barrels. They knew what they were. They understood. The large male gestured for us to follow. What choice did we have? Dawson and I picked up Carter, who was starting to come around, and walked deeper into the valley. The creatures followed, surrounded us, but didn't touch us. We were prisoners, but treated almost like guests. They led us to a cave, natural but modified. The entrance widened, the floor worn smooth by centuries of use. Inside were things that shouldn't exist. Paintings on the walls, crude but clear, showing the creatures and other animals, maybe depicting hunts or history. Stone tools, more sophisticated than anything I'd seen in museums. And bones. Piles of bones. Some clearly animal, others that looked disturbingly human-like but wrong. Too large, too thick. The large male pointed at the paintings, then at us, then made a sweeping gesture that seemed to encompass everything. He was trying to tell us something. This was their place, their history, their world. We were the intruders. Carter was fully conscious now, sitting against the cave wall, his eyes wide with shock. Dawson stood beside me, tense, ready for anything. I tried to communicate, speaking slowly, clearly, telling them we meant no harm, we just wanted to leave. The large male tilted his head, listening, but I don't think he understood the words. Maybe the tone, though. Maybe the intent. One of the females approached Carter, reaching toward his torn jacket. He flinched, but she made a soft sound, almost soothing. She had something in her hand, a paste made from plants. Medicine? She gestured at his wounds. After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. She carefully applied the paste to the gashes on his back. Carter winced but didn't pull away. The paste smelled awful, but seemed to numb the pain. He relaxed slightly. We spent 3 hours in that cave, surrounded by impossible creatures, trying to understand each other. They showed us more paintings, including some that seemed to depict humans, stick figures with what looked like rifles, recent additions. They knew about us, had known for a long time. They pointed at these figures, then at us, then made gestures I interpreted as, "Stay away." They wanted us to leave and not come back. I nodded vigorously, trying to show I understood. We would leave. We would never come back. We would tell no one. That last part was a lie, but a necessary one. The large male studied me for a long moment, those amber eyes seeming to look right through me. Then he stood and walked out of the cave. The others followed, and we were left alone. We waited, unsure what to do. After about 30 minutes, one of the younger males returned. He gestured for us to follow. We did, supporting Carter between us. They led us through the valley, past more structures, more evidence of their society. At the far end was a trail I hadn't noticed before, narrow but passable. Our weapons were there, laid carefully on a flat rock. The message was clear. Take them and go. We didn't need to be told twice. We grabbed our rifles and started down the trail. I looked back once to see dozens of them watching us leave, standing motionless as sentinels. Then the trail turned, and they were gone. The path led us out of the hidden valley and connected to a forestry road I recognized, though we were miles from where we should have been. We hiked for 6 hours straight, not stopping, not speaking, just moving. As the sun set, we reached a ranger station, an emergency outpost we maintained for search and rescue operations. I called for evacuation, reporting a medical emergency, Carter's injuries from a bear attack. The helicopter arrived an hour later. As we lifted off, I looked down at the black forest spread beneath us, vast and dark and full of secrets. Somewhere down there, they were watching us leave, making sure we were really going. The official report was simple. Equipment failure led to us getting lost. Carter was injured in a fall, the gashes on his back from sliding across rocks. We made our way out, end of story. Dawson and Carter agreed to stick to the story. What else could we say? That we'd been held captive by Sasquatch? That there was an entire civilization of them living in the Black Forest? We'd be laughed out of the service, maybe institutionalized. But the dreams started immediately. Every night, I see those amber eyes. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that valley, surrounded by things that shouldn't exist. Carter quit the service the day he was released from the hospital, moved to Arizona, as far from forests as he could get. Last I heard, he was working casino security in Vegas. Never talks about his time as a ranger. Dawson lasted 2 weeks before submitting his retirement papers. 20 years of service, gone. He told me he couldn't go back into the woods knowing what was out there. Couldn't pretend everything was normal. He bought a condo in Florida, spends his time fishing in the ocean, wide open water where you can see everything coming. And me? I'm still here, still in the hospital, writing this account that no one will believe. My ribs will heal, my arm will mend, the stitches will come out. But I'll never be the same, because I know the truth now. We share this world with something ancient, intelligent, and powerful, something that has chosen to remain hidden, to let us believe we're alone. But we're not alone. We never have been. The Black Forest is closed for the winter now, officially for trail maintenance and storm damage. But I know the real reason. There have been more sightings, more encounters. 3 hikers went missing last month, vanished without a trace. Their camp was found destroyed, their gear scattered. The official story is they got caught in an early blizzard, but I saw the photos. I recognized the claw marks on the trees around their camp. The government knows, has to know. There are too many incidents, too much evidence, but what can they do? Announce that Bigfoot is real? That there are hundreds, maybe thousands of them living in our national forests? The panic would be catastrophic. The hunting parties, the scientists wanting to capture and study them, the military wanting to eliminate a potential threat. It would be a bloodbath, and we would lose. Because here's what I learned in that valley, what those paintings on the cave walls were trying to tell us. They were here first. Long before humans crossed the land bridge, before we spread across the continent, they were here. We're the invasive species, the recent arrivals. They've watched us multiply, spread, destroy, and they've retreated deeper and deeper into the wild places, the last refuges we haven't conquered. But those refuges are shrinking. Every year, we push further into their territory. Every year, the encounters increase. They're running out of places to hide. And when they can't hide anymore, when we finally force them into the open, what then? Do we try to coexist with something that challenges our entire understanding of the world? Or do we do what humans always do when faced with something different, something threatening? We destroy it. I think about the large male, the leader, trying to communicate with us. The female treating Carter's wounds. They could have killed us easily, but they chose not to. They showed mercy, intelligence, restraint, more than we would have shown them if the positions were reversed. My supervisor visited yesterday, asking when I'll be ready to return to duty. I told him I'm done, that I'm resigning as soon as I'm released. He tried to convince me to stay, said I was one of the best rangers they had, that the Black Forest needed experienced people. I almost laughed. The Black Forest doesn't need rangers. It has its own guardians, ancient and powerful, and they don't want us there. He asked if this was about what happened, about Carter and Dawson. I said yes, in a way. He nodded, said he understood, that sometimes the job was too much, that there was no shame in walking away. He has no idea how right he is. Tomorrow, I'll be discharged. I'll go home to my empty apartment, pack my things, and leave Oregon. Maybe head east, find a job in a city where the only trees are planted in parks, where the biggest wildlife is pigeons and rats. Somewhere I can pretend the last 2 weeks didn't happen, that I didn't see what I saw, that I don't know what I know. But I'll never forget. Every time I see a forest on TV, every time I hear about hikers going missing, every time someone mentions Bigfoot as a joke, I'll remember. Those amber eyes, that hidden valley, the intelligence and sadness I saw in their faces. They're out there, watching, waiting, hoping we'll leave them alone but knowing we won't. The Black Forest keeps its secrets, but not from everyone. Carter knows, Dawson knows, I know, and now, whoever reads this knows. They exist, they're real, and they're running out of patience. I've included GPS coordinates at the end of this account, the location where we entered that hidden valley. I don't know if anyone will ever use them, if anyone will believe this enough to investigate. Part of me hopes not. Let them stay hidden, let them have their peace. But part of me knows someone will go looking. Human curiosity is both our greatest strength and our fatal flaw. If you do go, if you're brave or foolish enough to seek them out, remember this. You're entering their world, not yours. Show respect. Don't bring weapons. Don't bring cameras. Don't bring others. Go alone, quietly, humbly. Maybe they'll let you see what we saw. Maybe they'll let you leave like they let us leave. Or maybe they won't. Maybe their patience has finally run out. Maybe the next person who stumbles into their territory won't be so lucky. I don't know. I can't know. All I can do is warn you. The Black Forest is not what you think it is. The wilderness is not empty. We are not alone. And some things are better left undiscovered. This is my testimony, my warning, my confession. I, Samuel Brooks, swear that everything I've written here is true, as impossible as it seems. I saw them. They saw me. And in that moment of mutual recognition, I understood that everything we believe about our place in the natural world is wrong. We are not the apex predators. We are not the only intelligent species. We are not in control. We exist because they allow it, because they've chosen to remain hidden rather than confront us. But that choice is not guaranteed. That patience is not infinite. The creatures of the Black Forest are real, and they're watching. Always watching, waiting for us to make the wrong move, to push too far, to finally force their hand. When that day comes, God help us all, because we are not ready for what lives in the deep woods. We never have been, and we never will be. I hear them calling sometimes in my dreams, that deep resonant sound that vibrates in your chest. It's not a threat, it's a lament, a mourning call for the world that was, before we came, before we changed everything. They remember when the forests stretched from ocean to ocean, when they could walk freely without fear of discovery. They remember, and they mourn. And sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in my hospital bed, I mourn with them. For the world we've lost, for the mystery we're destroying, for the inevitable confrontation that's coming. Because it is coming. Every tree we cut, every trail we blaze, every development we build brings us closer to the day when hiding is no longer an option. What will we do then, when the truth can no longer be denied, when the evidence is overwhelming, when one of them is finally captured or killed and displayed for all the world to see? Will we recognize them as equals, as fellow inhabitants of this earth deserving of respect and protection? Or will we see them as threats to be eliminated, curiosities to be studied, resources to be exploited? I think I know the answer. History tells us what happens when two intelligent species compete for the same territory. One survives, one doesn't, and despite their size, their strength, their intelligence, they're outnumbered. We have technology, weapons, the ability to destroy entire ecosystems. They have the forests, and we're taking those away piece by piece. Maybe that's why they let us go. Maybe they looked at us, three scared rangers stumbling into their home, and saw not enemies, but messengers. Maybe they wanted us to carry this story back, to plant seeds of doubt, to make someone, anyone, think twice before sending more people into their territory. If so, they chose poorly. Carter won't talk about it. Dawson pretends it didn't happen. And me? I'm writing this account that will be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized ranger who spent too long in the woods. No one will believe it. No one wants to believe it. It's easier to live in a world where we're alone at the top of the food chain. But we're not alone, and we're not at the top. We just think we are because the real apex predators have chosen to avoid us, for now. The doctor just came in to tell me I can leave tomorrow morning. My body is healed enough, he says. The physical trauma is manageable. He prescribes pain medication for my ribs, antibiotics for the lingering infection from the gashes, and suggests I speak with a therapist about the psychological trauma. I nod and thank him, but I know no therapist can help with what I'm carrying. How do you process the impossible? How do you integrate into your worldview something that shatters everything you thought you knew? How do you go back to normal life knowing that normal is an illusion, that just beyond the edge of civilization ancient eyes are watching? You don't. You can't. You just carry it with you, this terrible knowledge, this burden of truth that no one wants to hear. You wake up every morning and pretend the world is what everyone believes it to be. You go through the motions of ordinary life while knowing that extraordinary things lurk just out of sight. You become a keeper of secrets that would reshape humanity's understanding of itself, and you keep them because the alternative is chaos. But secrets have a way of eating at you. They hollow you out from the inside, leaving you a shell of who you were. I can feel it happening already. The Samuel Brooks who entered the Black Forest 2 weeks ago is gone. What's left is someone who knows too much, who's seen behind the veil, who can never again look at a forest without wondering what's looking back. Maybe that's the real reason they let us go. Not mercy, not communication, but punishment. They cursed us with knowledge, with the burden of truth, knowing it would destroy us more surely than their claws ever could. Carter's paranoia, Dawson's denial, my obsession, were all broken in different ways by what we experienced. We survived physically, but died psychologically. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across my hospital room. Soon it will be dark, and I'll lie here listening to the sounds of the city, trying not to think about what moves in the darkness of the Black Forest. Trying not to wonder if they remember us, if they discuss the 3 humans who stumbled into their world and left with their lives, but not their sanity. Tomorrow I leave this place. I'll pack up this account, seal it in an envelope, and mail it to someone I trust, someone who might believe or at least preserve it. Then I'll disappear, find some corner of the world where I can try to forget, though I know I never will. The Black Forest will continue to keep its secrets. The creatures will continue to hide, watching humanity encroach further and further into their domain. And someday, probably soon, there will be another encounter. Another group of rangers or hikers or hunters will stumble into the wrong valley, see what shouldn't be seen, and if they're lucky, they'll be allowed to leave with nothing but nightmares and disbelief. But luck runs out. Patience ends. And when that happens, when the careful balance finally tips, when they decide that hiding is no longer an option, we'll discover that all our weapons, all our technology, all our supposed dominance over nature means nothing against something that survived for millennia, by being smarter, stronger, and more adaptable than we ever imagined. The Black Forest is not our forest. It never was. We're just visitors, tolerated for now, but not welcome. The real owners are patient, but they're watching. And they're waiting. And God help us when they decide they've waited long enough. This concludes the account of Samuel Brooks, former ranger of the Black Forest, witness to the impossible, keeper of truths no one wants to hear. May whoever reads this have more wisdom than I did. May you stay out of the deep woods. May you respect the boundaries between our world and theirs, because those boundaries are all that keep us safe, and they're getting thinner every day.